Hey there, tonight we're diving into how the Celts survived Roman invasions. Not the epic movie battles, but the crafty guerrilla tactics and unexpected alliances that kept them thriving against all odds. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. If you're going to hang out with the Celts, you better brush up on your geography, because these folks had a serious case of wanderlust. By around 500 BCE, they were sprawling across Europe like a family that went on vacation and just never came home. From the verdant hills of modern-day Ireland to the salty shores of the Black Sea, the Celts were everywhere, living life like a sprawling epic rather than a neat chapter book. Now, before we dive in, let's tackle the big, hairy myth looming over our Celtic comrades, the term barbarian. You might think of them as wildlings from the pages of a fantasy novel, but that's just a Roman PR campaign gone too far. The Celts were a complex mosaic of tribes, each with its own flair and flavor. Sure, they had a penchant for a good brawl and some eye-catching bardy art, but so did the Romans once they let their hair down. These so-called barbarians were actually connoisseurs of trade, connecting northern Europe to the Mediterranean like a well-oiled machine. By 500 BCE, Celtic trade routes were buzzing with activity, dealing in everything from tin to amber. They were the Amazon prime of the ancient world, with goods traversing hundreds of miles faster than you could say Caesar salad. Speaking of trade, let's talk dough, or rather, the lack of it. The Celts didn't deal in coins until later. They preferred bartering like it was an art form. Imagine swapping a cow for a shiny new sword. Practical, right. But what they lacked in coinage, they made up for in connections, establishing bustling trade hubs that would make modern supply chain managers weep with envy. Socially and politically, the Celts were like a jigsaw puzzle tossed in the air. Tribes had their own leaders, often a chieftain or king, which sounds grand until you realize that meant constant jockeying for power. Think Game of Thrones, but without the dragons and with more plaid. These tribes were as diverse as a box of chocolates, each one with its own customs, dialects and styles. Now, if you were to wander into a Celtic village, you might meet the Druids, not the kind with starry robes and wands, but a learned elite who were more about oral traditions and less about pointy hats. These guys and gals were the intellectual heavyweights of Celtic society, overseeing everything from legal matters to religious rituals. They were like the Google of their time, holding a wealth of knowledge that was passed down orally through generations. And yes, they were likely behind those mysterious stone circles that have puzzled more than a few historians. The Druids were the social glue, the keepers of wisdom, and for a while, the Romans' worst nightmare. Julius Caesar himself, in his Gallic Wars, gave them a nod, albeit a grudging one, noting their influence and the respect they commanded. But what Caesar didn't grasp was the Druids' role in fostering a sense of unity among the tribal patchwork. The Celt society was like a vibrant tapestry, woven with threads of fierce independence and communal spirit. They were the kind of people who'd invite you to the feast, but also expect you to join the fight when the time came. And while Rome was busy building its empire with roads and aqueducts, the Celts were mastering the art of living in harmony, or at least a version of it. Economically, they thrived on agriculture, with a side of metallurgy that would put most blacksmiths to shame. The Celts knew their way around a forge, crafting weapons and jewelry with an eye for beauty and a mind for battle. Their craftsmanship was so top-notch that when the Romans finally showed up, they couldn't help but admire and pilfer the Celtic designs. So, next time someone throws the word barbarian around, remember it's just a lazy shorthand for a people who were anything but. The Celts were traders, warriors and thinkers, living in a world that was as complex and interconnected as any modern society. They might not have had Wi-Fi, but they sure knew how to stay connected. And as for those Roman invaders, well, let's just say they had more than a little surprise coming. And so, just as the Celts were perfecting their own brand of organized chaos, with Druids philosophizing and blacksmiths crafting top-notch swords, who should come knocking but the Romans? Yes, the Romans, those uninvited guests who had a knack for empire building and a taste for the dramatic. their first official meet and greet with the Celts, the Gallic Wars, kicking off around 58 BCE, with Julius Caesar at the helm, brandishing his own special brand of PR wizardry. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate Caesar's marketing genius. I came, I saw, I conquered. Sounds impressive, right? But let's fact-check this ancient soundbite. Marching legions across Europe wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Logistics were a nightmare. Picture trying to organize a massive road trip with tens of thousands of soldiers, each expecting a steady supply of food, shelter, and the occasional morale-boosting pep talk. We're talking 30, 000 to 50, 000 troops, each needing several pounds of grain daily. That's a lot of bread, folks. And then there was the small matter of funding this military escapade. War isn't cheap, not even in the ancient world. Caesar financed his campaigns through loans from Roman financiers, effectively gambling on his victories to repay those back home. Imagine the pressure. It wasn't just the legions who were marching. Caesar's creditors were, metaphorically, breathing down his neck with every step. So, while Caesar was busy crafting his narrative of effortless conquest, the reality was more like a high-stakes chess game. The Celts, with their decentralized tribal confederations, didn't make it easy. They were scrappy fighters, familiar with their rugged terrain, and they had a habit of not sticking to the Roman script. Surprise ambushes and guerrilla tactics were their forte. For the Celts, warfare was a community affair, with warriors rallying behind charismatic chieftains who, unlike the Roman generals, didn't have to report back to a senate. These first encounters were less about clashing civilizations and more about two worlds accidentally bumping into each other at a very inconvenient time. The Romans, with their legions and logistics, were the epitome of military order. The Celts, with their wild hair and wilder tactics, were the embodiment of organized chaos. And yet, both sides shared an ironic commonality, a passion for expansion. But let's not romanticize this like a grand historical opera. The Celts weren't noble savages defending their pristine lands from an evil empire. They were as politically savvy as the Romans, forming and breaking alliances when it suited them. And the Romans, well, they weren't just empire builders with a penchant for marble statues. They were also skilled negotiators, often winning over Celtic tribes with promises of wealth and Roman citizenship rather than outright conquest. As for Caesar's famous writings on the Gallic Wars, they were less an objective chronicle and more a carefully curated dispatch back to Rome. Think of it as ancient clickbait, designed to boost his political career. So while he was painting the Celts as the ultimate barbarian adversaries, he was also portraying himself as the hero of the hour. Yet, for all his literary flair, Caesar never quite managed to capture the full complexity of the Celtic world, a world that was intricate, diverse, and above all, resilient. Economically, the Gallic Wars were a double-edged sword. For the Celts, the Roman invasion disrupted trade routes, but it also introduced new markets and opportunities. Roman demand for Celtic goods, everything from slaves to precious metals, created a boom of sorts, albeit one that came with the heavy price of cultural upheaval. And while the Romans brought roads and infrastructure, they also brought taxation and a legal system that was as foreign as it was bureaucratic. In the end, the clash between Celts and Romans was less about which culture was superior and more about a struggle for control over resources and power. It was a messy, complicated affair, with no clear heroes or villains, just humans with all their ambitions, flaws, and the occasional stroke of genius or madness. So, as the dust settled on the first encounters, both sides had learned valuable lessons. The Celts had tasted the bitter reality of Roman ambition, and the Romans had discovered that conquering wasn't the same as controlling. They were just getting started in this epic historical saga, where myth and reality danced a complicated waltz, each step revealing new layers of intrigue and complexity. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. As the smoke cleared from those initial skirmishes, both the Celts and Romans were recalibrating their strategies, like chess players pausing to reconsider their next move. You see, the Celts weren't just rolling over. They were crafting a response that would make any underdog story seem tame. Enter Vercingetorix, the man with a name as formidable as his reputation. You might not find him on a cereal box, but in the annals of history, this guy was a big deal. Vercingetorix was a chieftain of the Arvani tribe, and by 52 BCE, he had rallied an impressive coalition of Gallic tribes against the Romans. Picture a rock star pulling together an all-star band for one epic tour. Only this wasn't about music. It was about survival. Vercingetorix understood that to face the well-oiled Roman war machine, the Celts needed unity. He was like the Steve Jobs of Gaul, presenting a vision where tribal rivalries took a back seat to a common goal. But let's not sugarcoat it. Vercingetorix's strategy wasn't all about sunshine and rainbows. He employed a scorched earth policy, torching his own lands to prevent the Romans from living off them. It was a harsh strategy, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Imagine convincing your neighbors to burn down their houses to stop an advancing army. Not an easy sell, but Vercingetorix managed it, rallying around 80,000 warriors at the peak of his power. Yet even with this coalition, the Celts were up against Roman military might, which was like the ancient equivalent of a military-industrial complex. The Romans were disciplined, with formations like the testudo, or tortoise, that turned their legions into walking fortresses. And their engineering skills, let's just say if they were around today, they'd probably have won an award for the best road networks. But the Celts had their own tricks. Guerrilla warfare was their bread and butter. They knew their landscapes like the back of their hands, using the terrain to ambush Roman legions, and then vanishing like mist in the morning. It was asymmetrical warfare at its finest, proving that you didn't need to match the Romans man for man. You just had to outsmart them. And let's talk about alliances. The Celts weren't above making deals with rival tribes, or even with the Romans themselves when it suited them. Politics in ancient Gaul was a bit like a game of high-stakes poker, with bluffs, alliances, and betrayals. The Romans, for their part, were adept at exploiting these divisions, offering bribes, citizenship, or favorable terms to those willing to switch sides. It was a game of who could outwit whom, with the stakes being nothing less than survival. Yet, for all the cunning and bravery, there were strategic blunders on both sides. Take the Battle of Gergovia, where Vercingetorix managed to defeat Caesar in one of the few blemishes on the Romans' record. But it wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a morale booster for the Celts, proof that the Romans could bleed. However, the subsequent siege of Alesia was where things took a turn. Caesar, ever the master tactician, besieged the fortified city while simultaneously defending against a relief army of Celts. A multitasking feat that would make any project manager jealous. The Celts' mistake, underestimating Roman resolve and their ability to construct not one, but two sets of fortifications around Alesia, a circumvallation and a contravallation, effectively trapping Vercingetorix and his forces. When the dust settled, Vercingetorix surrendered, and Gaul was on the path to becoming a Roman province. But don't think for a second that this was the end of Celtic resistance. Just because Vercingetorix was out of the picture didn't mean the Celts were done. The spirit of rebellion simmered beneath the surface, with sporadic uprisings and resistance efforts continuing. The Romans might have won the battles, but the war for cultural and political dominance was far from over. Economically, the Roman invasion was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the integration into the Roman economy brought new opportunities and stability. On the other, it meant the imposition of Roman taxes and land confiscations, which, let's face it, didn't exactly win hearts and minds. The Celts found themselves navigating a new world where Roman law and order clashed with their traditional ways of life. And here's where the hills come into play. Running to the hills wasn't just a retreat, it was a strategic withdrawal. The Celts knew that the highlands and forests offered natural defenses against Roman legions. It was a classic case of live to fight another day, preserving their culture and identity while waiting for the right moment to strike back. So, as we leave this chapter, remember that the story of the Celts versus the Romans is one of resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity. It wasn't just a fight for land, it was a fight for a way of life. And while the Romans might have painted the Celts as barbarians in their narratives, the reality was far more nuanced. These were people who, despite overwhelming odds, refused to simply fade into history. They adapted, resisted, and in many ways shaped the Roman world as much as they were shaped by it. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Celts is far from over. They've got more tricks up their sleeves and more stories to tell, in a game of survival that's as unpredictable as history itself. As the Celts huddled in their highland retreats, plotting their next move, the Romans were busy rolling out the red carpet of civilization, or at least their version of it. Welcome to the cultural mashup of the century. The Celts and Romans, starring in a historical buddy film no one saw coming. Spoiler alert. This one involves less camaraderie and more cultural appropriation. Let's kick things off with infrastructure, the Romans' not-so-secret weapon. Roads, aqueducts, and baths. Oh my. These were the tools of empire, the backbone of Roman control, and they laid them out across Gaul like a well-planned gridiron. By 47 C, Roman roads stretched over 80,000 kilometers across the empire, and Gaul was no exception. These roads were the ancient equivalent of fiber-optic cables, ensuring swift military deployment, efficient tax collection, and a steady flow of Roman culture. To the Celts, these roads were both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, they connected far-flung tribes, fostering trade and communication. On the other, they were a constant reminder of Roman dominance, like having a freeway run through your backyard, except with more soldiers and fewer traffic jams. But let's not romanticize this infrastructural wonderland. The Romans weren't exactly building roads out of the kindness of their hearts. These projects were funded by taxes, and if there's one thing the Romans loved more than an aqueduct, it was a tax. Land taxes, poll taxes, tolls. If it moved, grew, or existed within the empire, it was taxed. And who bore the brunt of this fiscal burden? The newly conquered Celts, of course, who found themselves footing the bill for their own subjugation. Imagine being charged for the privilege of being conquered. It's like a bad hotel with a surprise resort fee. While the Romans were engineering their way into the Celtic heartland, the Celts were leaving their own indelible mark. Celtic artistry and craftsmanship were the envy of Europe. We're talking about intricate metalwork, vibrant textiles, and jewelry that could make even a Roman patrician do a double take. The Celts had a knack for turning raw materials into works of art, blending functionality with flair. Their designs were so captivating that even the Romans, with their toga-clad sophistication, couldn't resist a bit of Celtic bling. This cultural exchange wasn't a one-way street. As Roman villas sprouted up across Gaul, they were often adorned with Celtic motifs. Picture a Roman dining room with a Celtic twist, elegant mosaics featuring knotwork patterns, murals depicting Celtic myths, and even the odd Celtic guard thrown in for good measure. It was like a cultural fusion restaurant where the menu was written by history itself. The Romans might have been the conquerors, but culturally, it was a tug-of-war with no clear winner. Yet, beneath this veneer of cultural blending, tensions simmered. The so-called Pax Romana, Roman peace, was anything but peaceful for those on the receiving end. The Celts found themselves navigating a new political landscape where Roman law reigned supreme. Gone were the days when a druid could settle disputes with a wise word and a knowing nod. Now, it was all about Roman judges, written laws, and a bureaucracy that would make any modern-day DMV seem efficient. Rebellion was always just a heartbeat away. Every so often, a charismatic leader would rise from the Celtic ranks, rallying their kin to take up arms against their Roman overlords. These uprisings were like sparks in a tinder-dry forest, unpredictable and dangerous. Take the revolt of the Boudiccan uprising in 60-61 CE. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, led a revolt that saw the destruction of several Roman settlements and nearly ousted the Romans from Britannia. Though ultimately quelled, it served as a potent reminder that Celtic resistance was alive and well. Economically, the Celtic world was undergoing a metamorphosis. The introduction of Roman currency brought about a seismic shift. The Celts, who had once bartered like pros, now found themselves dealing in coins. This wasn't just a change in payment methods. It was a transformation in economic thinking. Trade boomed, with Celtic goods finding their way into Roman markets and vice versa. The Celts were savvy enough to exploit these new opportunities, exporting everything from wool to tin, while importing Roman luxuries like wine and olive oil. It was a trade-off in every sense, with the Celts gaining access to new markets, but losing a degree of economic independence. And let's not forget about the social dynamics at play. The Romans introduced their own version of social hierarchy, with Roman citizens at the top, and everyone else scrambling for a rung on the ladder. Some Celts embraced Roman citizenship, seeing it as a ticket to prosperity and influence. Others clung to their Celtic roots, viewing Romanization as a betrayal of their heritage. It was a cultural identity crisis on a grand scale, with individuals and tribes caught between two worlds. As the Celts and Romans continued their dance of cultural exchange, it was clear that neither side would emerge unscathed. The Romans might have brought roads and order, but they also brought taxes and oppression. The Celts, for their part, contributed artistry and rebellion, each act a testament to their enduring spirit. It was a complex relationship, a blend of admiration and animosity, collaboration and conflict. And while the Romans might have written the history books, the Celts left their mark on the very fabric of Roman society. So, as we pause in this chapter of our saga, remember that history isn't just about the victors or the vanquished. It's about the interplay of cultures, the merging of ideas, and the resilience of people caught in the tides of change. The Celts and Romans might have been adversaries, but in their collision they created something unique, a tapestry of history woven with threads of struggle and adaptation. Stay tuned, because the echoes of this cultural clash will resonate through history, shaping the world in ways neither side could have imagined. The clash of cultures between the Celts and Romans wasn't a simple case of conqueror versus conquered. It was more like a complex dance where both partners tried to lead. By the time the Romans decided to pack up their legions and withdraw in the 5th century, the Celts had done more than just survive. They had adapted, reshaped, and ultimately thrived in their own unique way. The legacy of their resistance is a tapestry woven with threads of resilience and reinvention, each strand telling a story of a people who refused to be just another footnote in Roman history. Let's kick things off with identity, that ever-elusive concept that has more layers than a Celtic chief's plaid. Despite centuries of Roman rule, the Celts managed to hold onto their cultural DNA like a dog with a bone. Sure, they borrowed a few things from their Roman neighbors, who wouldn't want a nice heated bath and a road that didn't resemble a goat trail. But beneath the Roman veneer, Celtic traditions simmered on, quietly subverting and blending with the dominant culture. Take language, for example. While Latin spread like wildfire across the Roman Empire, the Celtic tongues muttered stubbornly in the background, refusing to go gentle into that good night. By the time the Romans left, these languages were still alive and kicking, setting the stage for the development of modern Gaelic and Welsh. It wasn't just about clinging to words. It was about maintaining a sense of self in a world that would rather you assimilate. Religion, too, was a battleground of identity. The Romans might have brought their pantheon of gods, but the Celts were no strangers to a good divine shindig themselves. Druidic traditions persisted, albeit underground, like an ancient version of Fight Club, but with more rituals and fewer black eyes. Even as Christianity began its slow march across the Isles, it had to tango with existing Celtic beliefs. The result, a unique blend of practices that saw saints and spirits sharing the same stage. Economically, the end of Roman rule was a seismic shift. No longer tethered to the Roman economy, the Celts found themselves in a brave new world where trade routes had to be re-established and local economies reinvented. But if history teaches us anything, it's that necessity is the mother of invention, and the Celts were nothing if not inventive. They adapted, turning their attention to regional trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. It was a return to roots, but with a new understanding of the economic landscape. Politically, the Roman withdrawal left a power vacuum that was as unwieldy as it was unpredictable. With the absence of Roman governance, tribal chieftains and kings once again rose to prominence. It was a time of flux, where leadership was as much about charisma as it was about wielding a sword. The Celts saw this as an opportunity to reassert their political structures, and while it was no picnic, power struggles were as common as rainy days in Ireland. It marked a return to a more traditional form of governance. Now, let's talk about the myths and truths of Celtic resilience, those narratives that have been polished and romanticized through the ages. The Celts have often been portrayed as noble warriors, bravely resisting the might of Rome. And while there's a kernel of truth there, let's sprinkle in some reality. The Celts were as pragmatic as they were brave, often choosing negotiation over open conflict when it suited them. They were shrewd diplomats, trading partners, and yes, sometimes even collaborators with their Roman occupiers. This wasn't about selling out. It was about survival in a world that didn't play fair. The allure of the Celtic resistance lies in its complexity. It's not just a tale of defiance, but of cunning, adaptation, and an unyielding spirit. The Celts weren't just biding their time until the Romans left town. They were actively shaping their world, even under occupation, and that takes more than just bravery. It takes a particular kind of brilliance. So, as the Romans faded from the Celtic landscape, their legacy was less about roads and aqueducts, and more about the cultural dialogue they left behind. The Celts, with their tenacity and flair, took that dialogue and wrote their own chapters. They showed that resistance isn't just about the battles you fight, but the stories you tell and the identities you forge. In the end, the Celts' story is more than a historical footnote. It's a saga of resilience that echoes through time, reminding us that history isn't just written by the victors. It's woven by all those who live it, in every defiant word, every rebellious act, and every moment of adaptation. The Celts may have been up against a colossal empire, but they proved that sometimes the most enduring legacy is that of a culture that refuses to be forgotten. And in that defiance, they carved out a place in history that won't easily fade away. There he was, a young boy in Vinci, a town so small you'd miss it if you blinked too slowly while riding a donkey. Born in 1452, Leonardo da Vinci's early life was anything but the stuff of legend. Forget the myth of the boy genius sketching masterpieces in his crib. Leonardo was born out of wedlock to a notary, Sir Pirro, and a peasant girl, Caterina. His upbringing was more awkward family reunion than Renaissance fairy tale. Life in Vinci was a symphony of pastoral simplicity, with the daily grind of agriculture and the occasional scandalous whisper about the local nobility. It's easy to romanticize the verdant hills of Tuscany, but let's be real. Leonardo's early years were likely filled with more cow manure than artistic musings. Yet, in this backwater of the Medici-dominated Florence, Leonardo was about to start a journey that would redefine art and science. Fast forward to his teenage years, and we find Leonardo in Florence, a city pulsating with the energy of the Renaissance. Imagine if Silicon Valley and Paris Fashion Week had a baby, and you start to get the vibe of 15th century Florence. It was a place where artists and thinkers mingled, occasionally with daggers hidden in their togas because, well, politics. In this competitive cauldron, Leonardo found himself apprenticed to Andrea del Verrocchio, a master of so many trades you'd think he had an aversion to free time. Verrocchio ran a bustling workshop that churned out everything from silver chalices to frescoes, and young Leonardo was about to get a hands-on crash course in it all. Leonardo's apprenticeship wasn't just a paint-by-numbers gig. He swept floors, ground pigments, and learned the delicate art of not ticking off clients with deep pockets. He was the workshop's Swiss Army knife, gaining skills that would later allow him to blur the lines between art and engineering. Legend has it, Verrocchio's jaw dropped when Leonardo painted an angel in one of his works. The tale goes that Verrocchio was so impressed, or intimidated, that he vowed never to pick up a brush again. While this makes for a great story, it's probably as accurate as a politician's tax returns. The truth is, Verrocchio and Leonardo continued to work together, each benefiting from the other's talents. Renaissance Italy was a place where the line between science and art was as blurry as a poorly focused selfie. Leonardo was no overnight sensation, nor was he a one-trick pony. His notebooks from this period are a testament to his insatiable curiosity. They're filled with sketches of everything from dissected frogs to fantastical weapons that look like something out of a steampunk novel. These pages reveal the mind of a man who saw no boundaries between disciplines, connecting darts that others didn't even know existed. In Florence, Leonardo began to establish himself, not just as an artist, but as a thinker. His early works, like the Baptism of Christ, created under Verrocchio's watchful eye, hinted at the genius to come. But these weren't the polished masterpieces you'd see in a museum today. Early Leonardo was more of a rough draft, a work in progress, much like the society around him. And let's not forget the economic realities of the time. The patronage system was the kickstarter of the Renaissance, except instead of backers pledging $20 for a cool gadget, they were coughing up florins for frescoes and statues. Leonardo's patrons were often the movers and shakers of Florence. Think the Medici family, who were basically the Kardashians of their day, minus social media, but with way more political influence. Leonardo's early career was a balancing act, juggling commissions while feeding his voracious appetite for knowledge. It was a time when the Medici were transforming Florence into the cultural epicenter of Europe, and Leonardo was one of the many young talents caught in their gravitational pull. His apprenticeship under Verrocchio was just the beginning, a stepping stone that would lead him to redefine what it meant to be an artist and inventor. In the grand tapestry of history, Leonardo da Vinci's early life is often overshadowed by his later triumphs, but it's here, amidst the chaos and creativity of Renaissance Florence, where the seeds of his genius were sown. Leonardo wasn't born a legend. He became one through a relentless pursuit of knowledge and a refusal to be pigeonholed. So, the next time someone tells you about the prodigy who emerged fully formed from the Tuscan hills, feel free to set the record straight. Leonardo was a product of his time, a testament to what happens when curiosity meets opportunity in a world ripe for innovation. As Leonardo da Vinci moved beyond the bustling streets of Florence, he found himself in Milan, a city that was less of an artistic pressure cooker and more of an industrial forge. It was 1482, and at the ripe age of 30, Leonardo was ready to stretch his wings, both metaphorically and, as it turns out, quite literally. The Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, was in charge here, and he wasn't just looking for another painter. He wanted a Renaissance man in every sense of the word, someone who could fortify castles, design canals, and oh yes, occasionally paint a masterpiece. Leonardo's time in Milan was a whirlwind of creative chaos. Imagine a Renaissance startup hub, but instead of coding apps, Leonardo was sketching out contraptions that looked like the fever dreams of a particularly ambitious steampunk enthusiast. Take his flying machine, for example. You've probably seen it, a contraption that resembles a giant bat with a wingspan to make seagulls envious. Leonardo sketched it in the Codex on the Flight of Birds, around 1505. The idea was simple: man should fly. The execution, however, involved nothing less than a human-powered flapathon, which, let's be honest, would have made the Wright brothers snicker. It's easy to romanticize Leonardo as the first aeronautical engineer, but let's get real. His flying machine was about as practical as a chocolate teapot. It never got off the ground, literally. The lack of materials that could withstand both the weight and the force required meant that Leonardo's dream of soaring like a bird remained just that, a dream. But that doesn't mean it was a waste of time. These sketches were evidence of a mind that refused to accept the limitations of the era. He was like the ultimate what-if guy, constantly challenging the status quo with his imaginative leaps. Now, let's not pretend that Leonardo was just daydreaming away in Milan, unfettered by the realities of life. The man had to eat, after all. His artistic commissions were what kept the florins flowing, and his most famous work from this period, The Last Supper, was painted between 1495 and 1498. This wasn't just any wall painting. It was a fresco commissioned for the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie. But Leonardo, always the innovator, decided to experiment with a new technique, mixing oil and tempera on dry plaster. Spoiler alert, it didn't work out so well. The painting began to deteriorate soon after completion, a reminder that even geniuses sometimes get it wrong. Financially, Leonardo had to juggle more than just brushes and ideas. The Duke of Milan was a patron, but not a particularly reliable one. Political instability in the region meant that funds weren't always forthcoming, and Leonardo often had to rely on other commissions to make ends meet. It's estimated that The Last Supper cost around 700 ducats, a modest sum considering its fame today. But back then, it was a considerable investment for a mural that began flaking before the paint was dry. Yet, despite the technical mishaps, the painting's composition, those dramatic expressions, and the dynamic grouping of figures, cemented Leonardo's reputation as a master of human emotion. While Leonardo's artistic projects paid the bills, his heart was often in his scientific pursuits. His notebooks from this period are a testament to his boundless curiosity. They are filled with anatomical studies, sketches of war machines, and observations of natural phenomena. Leonardo dissected more than 30 human corpses in his lifetime, all in the name of science, a practice not for the squeamish, but crucial for his detailed anatomical drawings. Yet he never published these findings. The reason? Well, books weren't exactly flying off the shelves back in the day, and without a major patron to fund his scientific explorations, many of his discoveries remained locked away in his private journals. Leonardo's time in Milan was also marked by his relationships with other thinkers and creators. He mingled with mathematicians, engineers, and architects, forming a Renaissance version of a think tank. One of his associates was Luca Pacioli, a mathematician with whom Leonardo collaborated on De Divina Proportion, a book that explored mathematical proportions in art and architecture. This was the kind of intellectual cross-pollination that Leonardo thrived on, constantly seeking to blend disciplines in ways that were unheard of. Despite his genius, Leonardo was no stranger to the whims of fortune. When the French invaded Milan in 1499, toppling Ludovico Sforza, Leonardo had to pack up his workshop and flee. He traveled to Venice, then returned to Florence, and later found himself in Rome. Each move was a testament to the precariousness of life as an artist and inventor in Renaissance Italy. Political upheavals, economic constraints, and the fickle nature of patronage meant that Leonardo's career was as much about survival as it was about creation. In the grand scheme of things, Leonardo's time in Milan was a microcosm of his entire life, an endless balancing act between art and science, aspiration and reality. His impractical inventions might never have left the pages of his notebooks, but they served a greater purpose. They were a declaration of human potential, a challenge to the limitations of the time. Leonardo da Vinci was more than just a painter or an inventor. He was a visionary who dared to imagine a world unshackled by the constraints of the present. So, as we leave Leonardo in the midst of his Milanese exploits, remember that the genius of Da Vinci isn't just in the works he completed, but in the questions he dared to ask. And while his flying machines may never have soared, his ideas certainly did, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire our own flights of fancy today. Stay tuned, because Leonardo's story is far from over, and there's a whole lot more curiosity and chaos waiting in the wings. Leonardo da Vinci, ever the restless spirit, was just getting warmed up. His time in Milan had been a whirlwind of sketches, science, and slightly flaky frescoes. While the Last Supper was busy shedding bits of itself like a snake in spring, Leonardo was already dreaming up his next masterpieces. Enter the Mona Lisa, a painting that needs no introduction, but definitely deserves a reality check. Let's dive into the Mona Lisa, or as her friends called her, La Gioconda. The painting is a cultural icon, the subject of endless speculation, and a perpetual magnet for tourists in the Louvre. Yet behind that serene smile lies a tale of patience-testing proportions. Commissioned by Francesco del Giocondo, a wealthy Florentine merchant, this portrait of his wife, Lisa Gherardini, was supposed to be a straightforward gig. But with Leonardo, nothing was ever simple. Leonardo started working on the Mona Lisa around 1503, and it was likely completed by 1506, or was it? If we know one thing about Leonardo, it's that he treated deadlines like suggestions. It's believed he continued to tinker with the painting until 1517. That's a whopping 14 years. Forget about client impatience. Francesco must have been pulling his hair out. Yet, in Leonardo's defense, perfection takes time, and he was nothing if not a perfectionist. Now, why did it take so long? Theories abound, but one possibility is Leonardo's compulsive need for detail. He didn't just paint a smile, he painted the soul beneath it. The Mona Lisa's enigmatic expression has been analyzed more than a Shakespearean sonnet. Some say she's smiling, others see a smirk, and a few are sure she's plotting world domination. The subtle play of light and shadow, known as esfumado, was Leonardo's secret sauce. It's what gives Mona Lisa her lifelike presence, a technique that required painstaking layers of thin glazes, definitely not a weekend project. While we're on the subject of artistic obsession, let's not forget Leonardo's infatuation with anatomy. His dissections weren't just a side hustle. They were crucial to his understanding of the human form. He didn't simply paint what the eye saw. He painted what the mind comprehended. This anatomical insight is evident in the Mona Lisa, where every muscle and tendon beneath that demure dress seems to breathe with life. Leonardo wasn't just painting a portrait. He was capturing the essence of humanity. But, as with all things Leonardo, there's always a touch of mystery. Why did he keep the painting? Some suggest that Leonardo simply couldn't bear to part with his magnum opus. Others believe he was still perfecting it, even as he carted it around Europe. It eventually ended up in France, where it was acquired by King Francis I, becoming a jewel in the French royal collection. Fast forward a few centuries, and it's now the centerpiece of the Louvre, admired by millions but truly understood by few. Meanwhile, back in Milan, the Last Supper was facing its own set of challenges. The fresco was already showing signs of wear and tear, much to the dismay of its patrons. Leonardo's experimental technique, mixing oil and tempera, was supposed to provide a more vibrant and detailed finish than traditional fresco methods. Instead, it led to rapid deterioration, making the painting a constant restoration project. If anything, it was a testament to Leonardo's boldness and his willingness to push boundaries, even at the risk of failure. The logistical challenges didn't stop there. Imagine trying to work on a massive wall painting when your patron, Ludovico Sforza, expected prompt results, all while political instability loomed like a dark cloud. The Duke of Milan wasn't known for his patience, and Leonardo's meticulous approach must have been a constant test of his nerves. Yet, despite the technical and political hurdles, The Last Supper emerged as a masterpiece of composition and emotion, an enduring symbol of Leonardo's genius. Leonardo's later years were a blend of triumph and turbulence. As political tides shifted, he found himself in Rome under the patronage of the Vatican. While one might assume this was a golden opportunity, the reality was more complex. The papal court was a hotbed of intrigue and competition, where artists like Raphael and Michelangelo vied for favor. Leonardo, now in his 60s, was seen as the elder statesman of the art world, a revered figure, but not always the first choice for commissions. Yet, even as he navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics, Leonardo's curiosity remained unquenched. His notebooks from this period are a treasure trove of ideas, ranging from hydraulic machines to anatomical studies. It was as if his mind was a perpetual motion machine, constantly generating new concepts and challenges. Leonardo was never content to rest on his laurels. He was always reaching for the next big idea, even when the world around him seemed intent on slowing him down. In the end, Leonardo da Vinci's later life was defined by a relentless pursuit of knowledge and an unwavering commitment to his craft. He was a man of contradictions, an artist who saw beauty in the mechanics of the universe, a scientist who revered the mysteries of art. Despite the logistical challenges, the impatient patrons, and the inevitable decay of his creations, Leonardo's legacy endures. His works continue to captivate and confound, a testament to a mind that refused to be constrained by the limits of its time. So, as we leave Leonardo in the twilight of his career, remember that his genius was as much about the questions he asked as the answers he provided. Stay tuned, because Leonardo's journey is far from over, and there's more to uncover in the chapters that follow. The story of Leonardo da Vinci is not just about the art he created, but the world he imagined, and that world is still revealing itself, layer by layer, much like the masterpieces he left behind. So, as Leonardo da Vinci's life story unfolds like a Renaissance soap opera, we find him in France, where the scenery is as lush as the cheese is pungent. It was 1516 when Leonardo, now in his mid-60s, made his way to the court of King Francis I, the French monarch with a penchant for art and a budget to match. Francis I was the kind of king who'd invite you over for dinner and then casually ask if you could invent a new way to build a palace while you're at it. Leonardo, ever the opportunist, packed his bags and moseyed over the Alps, with his beloved Mona Lisa tucked under his arm like a carry-on. France, at the time, was a burgeoning hub of culture, and Francis I aimed to turn his court into the epicenter of European art and intellect. He offered Leonardo the title of premier painter and engineer and architect to the king, which was basically the Renaissance equivalent of a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract with a creative carte blanche. The king even gave Leonardo a cushy pad at the Château du Clos Lucé in Amboise, just a stone's throw from the royal residence. It was the kind of gig that made other artists green with envy, or maybe that was just the mold growing on the frescoes they were still trying to finish. But before you start picturing Leonardo lounging in French luxury, sipping wine and sketching masterpieces, let's set the record straight. His time at the French court was more about ideas than execution. By this stage, Leonardo was a bit like that one friend who's full of brilliant ideas, but never quite gets around to finishing any of them. His notebooks were bursting with plans for everything from hydraulic pumps to musical instruments, Yet most of these remained tantalizingly theoretical. Take his anatomical studies, for instance. Leonardo had spent decades dissecting corpses and sketching their innards with a fascination that would make modern pathologists nod approvingly. He had drawn over 240 detailed anatomical sketches and written around 13,000 words of notes. Despite the rigor and detail, these works were never published during his lifetime. Why? Partly because the logistics of publishing in the 16th century made it about as easy as launching a space shuttle with a slingshot. Plus, the church wasn't exactly a fan of cutting open bodies like turkeys on Thanksgiving. In France, Leonardo continued these studies, dissecting animals and refining his understanding of human anatomy. The irony is that while his anatomical drawings were scientifically revolutionary, they were also artistically mesmerizing, each line a testament to his dual identity as both scientist and artist. Yet, for all his genius, Leonardo never saw these works reach the wider audience they deserved. It was as if he had discovered the secret to life itself, and then thrown the key into the Seine. Now, let's talk about the Mona Lisa, because of course, she made the trip to France with Leonardo. The painting found a new home in the Château du Clos-Lucé, where it became part of the French royal collection. Francis, I purchased the painting for 4,000 gold coins, a princely sum at the time, and a testament to Leonardo's enduring allure. Imagine spending 4,000 gold coins on a single piece of art, while your subjects are busy trying to figure out how to afford their next loaf of bread. Yet, for Francis, the investment was worth every shiny coin. The Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile became a centerpiece of the French Renaissance. Leonardo's final years in France were also marked by his collaborations and debates with other intellectuals at court. One noble companion was Francesco Melzi, a young Milanese aristocrat who became Leonardo's student and devoted assistant. Melzi wasn't just a protege, he was also a lifeline, helping Leonardo organize his chaotic collection of notes and sketches. If you've ever seen a teenager's bedroom, you might have an idea of the organizational challenge they faced. For all the grandeur of the French court, Leonardo's health was declining. He suffered from paralysis in his right hand, which limited his ability to paint but left his intellect untouched. Despite this, Leonardo remained active, advising on projects and sharing his vast knowledge with those around him. He became a mentor figure, a wise sage in a land of youthful ambition and royal extravagance. As Leonardo's life drew to a close, he penned his will, leaving his notebooks and works to Melzi, who became the guardian of his legacy. Leonardo passed away on May 2, 1519, at the age of 67. According to legend, and we're talking the kind of legend that comes with a side of skepticism, King Francis, I was by his side, cradling the master's head as he took his final breath. It's a romantic image, but let's not kid ourselves. The king probably had more pressing matters than a bedside vigil. In death, as in life, Leonardo da Vinci left a legacy that was as complex as it was profound. His unfinished projects were not failures, but rather evidence of a mind that could never be fully contained. Leonardo's genius lay in his ability to see what others couldn't, to imagine the impossible and sketch it into reality. His final years under the patronage of Francis were a fitting tribute to a life spent at the intersection of art and science, a testament to the power of imagination in the face of mortality. And so, as we ponder Leonardo's final chapter in France, we see a man whose life was a masterpiece as intricate as any of his works. His story isn't just about the art he created or the inventions he dreamed up. It's about the endless curiosity that drove him to seek answers to questions others hadn't even thought to ask. Stay tuned, because Leonardo's influence doesn't end with his death. His ideas will continue to ripple through time, inspiring generations to come. There's more to explore, and we're not done yet. So, as we ponder Leonardo's final chapter in France, we see a man whose life was a masterpiece as intricate as any of his works. His story isn't just about the art he created or the inventions he dreamed up. It's about the endless curiosity that drove him to seek answers to questions others hadn't even thought to ask. Stay tuned, because Leonardo's influence doesn't end with his death. His ideas will continue to ripple through time, inspiring generations to come. There's more to explore, and we're not done yet. Let's dive headfirst into the legacy of Leonardo da Vinci, a man whose ideas were so ahead of his time, he was practically living in the Renaissance version of Back to the Future. You see, Leonardo wasn't just painting ladies with mysterious smiles or designing machines that defied gravity and common sense. He was planting seeds, a botanical metaphor for ideas that would germinate long after his time under the Tuscan sun. Leonardo's blend of art and invention was like the ultimate crossover episode, the kind that makes you wonder why nobody thought of it sooner. One of the most tangible impacts of his work is seen in the field of anatomy. Remember those 240 sketches of human innards? They didn't just gather dust in a French shadow. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you'll find medical professionals still poring through his notebooks like they were the holy grail of human physiology. His detailed studies of muscles, bones, and organs laid a foundation that modern anatomy textbooks would later build upon. Leonardo might not have published his findings, but he set a precedent for the scientific study of the human body that resonated through the centuries. Now, let's debunk a myth or two while we're at it. Leonardo is often hailed as the inventor of everything from helicopters to the kitchen sink. But let's get real. His drawings of flying machines were more Rube Goldberg than Wright brothers. They were visionary, yes, but hardly practical with the materials of his time. It's like trying to bake a souffle with a campfire. The intention is there, but the execution leaves something to be desired. However, the brilliance of Leonardo's visions lies in their ability to inspire. His sketches of parachutes, tanks, and even scuba gear weren't blueprints for immediate construction. They were challenges to future generations to think beyond the constraints of their current reality. Leonardo's influence in the art world is as undeniable as the Mona Lisa's smile is inscrutable. His use of chiaroscuro, those dramatic contrasts between light and dark, became a staple technique for artists who followed. Caravaggio, Rembrandt, and even the Baroque masters owe a nod to the groundwork Leonardo laid. His insistence on capturing human emotion and form with unprecedented detail set a new standard for portraiture. The Mona Lisa herself became a symbol of artistic excellence, her enigmatic expression sparking debates and inspiring artists for centuries. Economic context played a significant role in Leonardian legacy. The patronage system of the Renaissance was both a blessing and a curse. Artists were funded by wealthy patrons, but they were also at the mercy of their whims. Leonardo navigated this system with the skill of a seasoned diplomat, securing commissions from the likes of the Medici and Sforza families. This financial backing allowed him to pursue his passions, from painting to engineering, without the constant worry of where his next meal would come from. However, it also meant that many of his projects were left incomplete, victims of political upheaval and changing tides of fortune. Leonardo's approach was timelessly appealing because it was rooted in a relentless pursuit of knowledge. He embodied the Renaissance ideal of the universal man, one who was not confined to a single discipline, but who explored the interconnectedness of all things. This holistic approach is perhaps Leonardo's greatest legacy, a reminder that true innovation often comes from the intersection of diverse fields. Today, we see his influence in the increasingly interdisciplinary nature of modern research and development, where art, science, technology, and design converge to shape the future. Let's not forget the more romanticized aspects of Leonardo's life, which, while often exaggerated, hold a certain charm. The notion of the solitary genius working by candlelight on enigmatic masterpieces is an image that captivates the imagination. Yet the reality was far more complex. Leonardo was a social creature, engaged in lively intellectual debates and collaborations. His relationships with contemporaries like Botticelli and Raphael were not without their rivalries and tensions, but they also fostered a vibrant exchange of ideas that enriched the cultural tapestry of the Renaissance. So, what can we learn from Leonardo today? Perhaps it's the idea that curiosity is the engine of progress. In a world where we are often encouraged to specialize, Leonardo's life serves as a testament to the power of cross-disciplinary exploration. He didn't just stay in his lane. He built new roads, often unpaved and winding, into uncharted territories. His notebooks, filled with scribbles and sketches, are a chaotic roadmap of a mind that refused to be limited by the constraints of its time. Moreover, Leonardo reminds us that failure is not the end, but a necessary step in the process of innovation. Many of his inventions never saw the light of day, but they were invaluable experiments in pushing the boundaries of what was possible. It's a lesson in resilience, in understanding that the journey of discovery is as important as the destination. In wrapping up our journey through the life and legacy of Leonardo da Vinci, it's clear that his story is not just a tale of artistic triumphs and scientific endeavors. It's a narrative that speaks to the human condition, a testament to our innate desire to understand the world and our place within it. Leonardo's legacy is not confined to the pages of history books or the walls of galleries. It lives on in the curious minds that dare to ask, what if? And in the innovators who refuse to take no for an answer. As we close the book on Leonardo's life, we're left with more than just the memory of a Renaissance master. We're left with a challenge to continue his legacy of curiosity and creativity. His story is a reminder that while we may not all be able to paint a Mona Lisa or design a flying machine, we can all aspire to see the world through the eyes of a visionary. And who knows? In doing so, we might just stumble upon the next great idea, waiting to take flight. So, here's to Leonardo da Vinci, a man whose life was a canvas, and whose legacy is a masterpiece still unfolding. Let's keep exploring, questioning, and discovering, inspired by the timeless appeal of a mind that dared to dream beyond the horizon. Cleopatra didn't exactly roll out of bed one day and decide to become one of history's most compelling figures. Nope, she was born into a family drama that would make the most scandalous soap opera look like a children's bedtime story. Cleopatra Roman VII Philippa, to give her full title, was the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that had been running Egypt like their own personal fiefdom since Alexander the Great's empire hit the snooze button back in 323 BC. Now, Cleopatra's family was as Greek as they come, which might be a bit of a head-scratcher since she ruled Egypt. Here's the scoop. The Ptolemies were as Hellenistic as a feta cheese salad. They spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, and even spiced up their royal politics with a little something the ancient world loved: sibling marriages. Yes, you heard that right. In the Ptolemaic world, keeping it in the family was less of a taboo and more of a tradition. The idea was to keep the bloodline as pure as a freshly laundered toga, but what it actually did was create a family tree that looked more like a tangled ball of yarn. Born in 69 BC, Cleopatra was the daughter of Ptolemy Roman XII, a king with the regal nickname Orleats, or the flute player. Sounds charming until you realize his reign was more of a cacophony of debt and incompetence. Cleopatra's mom was likely Cleopatra v. Tryphena, although the Ptolemies weren't exactly sticklers for accurate record-keeping. Fast forward to her teenage years, and Cleopatra has already taken a crash course in political survival, courtesy of her family's eternal game of musical thrones. Cleopatra wasn't just a pretty face with a knack for eyeliner. She was a multilingual marvel, reportedly fluent in 9 languages including Egyptian. This might not seem like a big deal, but remember, she was part of a dynasty that typically didn't bother learning the local lingo. She was as much at ease speaking to Roman dignitaries in Latin as she was discussing philosophy in Greek. If there was a Rosetta Stone for charm and cunning, Cleopatra had it mastered. Then there was her brother Ptolemy Roman XIII. Now, sibling rivalry is one thing, but imagine having your brother as both a co-ruler and a nemesis. Cleopatra and Ptolemy Roman XIII were initially supposed to rule together after Daddy Dearest shuffled off in 51 BC. But governing alongside a teenage boy with delusions of grandeur is about as easy as nailing jelly to a wall. Cleopatra, sharp as a tack, found herself in a precarious situation as her brother's advisors started to edge her out of power. Here's where Cleopatra's story veers into the realm of the legendary. At just 18, Cleopatra wasn't about to let some teenage upstart with a crown knock her off her throne. She was exiled, but instead of sulking, she plotted her comeback. In true dramatic fashion, she managed to get Julius Caesar on her side. Ptolemy had forced her to flee Alexandria, but Cleopatra was nothing if not resourceful. Legend has it, she smuggled herself back into the royal palace rolled up in a rug. Now, that's one way to make an entrance. Her political savvy paid off when Caesar, probably impressed by her audacity and strategic brilliance, decided to back her claim to the throne. Ptolemy Roman XIII tantrum ended in a tragic drowning in the Nile during the Battle of the Nile, in 47 BC. Cleopatra was back in business, co-ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy Roman XIV, who was conveniently much easier to manage. Cleopatra's life was a masterclass in political maneuvering, family feuds, and sheer charisma. She wasn't just a product of her time, she was a force that shaped it. Her story was far from a fairy tale, filled with power plays and alliances that would make Machiavelli blush. Cleopatra knew the stakes, and she played her hand with the skill of a seasoned gambler, all while wrapped in the glamour and mystique that history has come to associate with her name. But let's not get carried away by the romantic allure. Cleopatra was a ruler who understood that in the Game of Thrones, you win or you end up a footnote. Cleopatra's game of power chess was just heating up when Julius Caesar strolled into the picture, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ego. In 48 BC, Cleopatra, exiled and slightly battered, but far from broken, orchestrated one of the most dramatic homecomings in history. Forget the usual diplomatic letters or formal introductions. Cleopatra's re-entry onto the political stage was more like a scene from a blockbuster movie, complete with rugs and a flair for the dramatic that would make any Hollywood director proud. Picture this: Alexandria, a city dripping with the wealth of the ancient world, buzzing with the kind of gossip that could make or break empires. Enter Julius Caesar, a Roman general with a reputation as vast as his appetite for power. He was in the middle of a civil war and had just arrived in Egypt, ostensibly to sort out the squabble between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy Roman XIII. But Caesar wasn't just a mediator. He was a man who saw opportunity in chaos. And Cleopatra, well, she was the embodiment of that opportunity. Cleopatra's legendary rug stunt is one of history's most theatrical entrances. Smuggled into Caesar's quarters wrapped in a rug, or, as some accounts suggest, a laundry sack, she emerged not as a defeated queen, but as a charismatic force of nature. The boldness of the act was quintessentially Cleopatra, audacious, theatrical, and utterly effective. It was the kind of move that spoke volumes without saying a word, capturing Caesar's attention in a way few could. Now, let's talk strategy. Cleopatra wasn't just looking for a knight in shining armor to save her reign. She was looking for an ally who could help her secure power in a world dominated by male rulers and Roman legions. For Caesar, aligning with Cleopatra was a calculated risk, one that promised both political leverage and the kind of notoriety that even a leader of his stature found tantalizing. Cleopatra offered him Egypt's wealth, strategic alliances, and let's not forget, a personal connection that would make even the most stoic of senators raise an eyebrow. Their alliance was sealed not just with political promises, but with a personal relationship that would scandalize Rome and cement Cleopatra's place in the annals of history. Cleopatra and Caesar's relationship was a union of minds as much as hearts, a partnership that blended political acumen with personal charisma. If Cleopatra was the queen of reinvention, then Caesar was the general who saw the world as his chessboard. Fast forward to Cleopatra's visit to Rome in 46 BC. Imagine the Eternal City, a metropolis that prided itself on its traditions and its aversion to anything that smelled of monarchy. Cleopatra's arrival turned the city into a carnival of whispers and side glances. She wasn't just another visiting dignitary. She was a living embodiment of the exotic, the foreign queen who had captured Caesar's heart, and perhaps his better judgment. The Romans, known for their love of spectacle, were both fascinated and scandalized by Cleopatra. Her presence brought with it an air of the otherworldly, a reminder that the world beyond Rome's borders was just as complex and power-hungry. Cleopatra was the talk of the town, her influence extending from the political chambers to the marketplaces, where her image adorned everything from jewelry to trinkets. But let's not romanticize too much. Cleopatra's time in Rome wasn't all roses and adoration. To many Romans, she was a threat, a living symbol of Caesar's potential ambitions to crown himself king, an idea that was about as popular in Rome as a tax increase. The Senate, never a fan of surprises, watched nervously as Caesar flaunted his relationship with Cleopatra, a move that was as politically dangerous as it was personally thrilling. Cleopatra's stay in Rome was a masterclass in diplomacy and image management. She navigated the intricate social web of Roman politics with the same dexterity that had allowed her to reclaim her throne in Egypt. Her presence was a statement. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen in exile. She was a political powerhouse, a woman who understood the intricacies of power and influence in a way that few others could match. And yet, for all the glamour and scandal, Cleopatra's Roman adventure was a precarious balancing act. She had to maintain her relationship with Caesar while also securing her position back home in Egypt. It was a tightrope walk of epic proportions, one where the stakes were as high as the columns of the Roman Forum. In the end, Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar was a gamble that paid off in ways both expected and unforeseen. She managed to secure her throne, but the alliance also thrust her into the spotlight of Roman politics, a place where friends and foes were often indistinguishable. Cleopatra was playing a long game, one where the rules were constantly changing, and where every move was scrutinized by a world eager to see her succeed or fail. But don't be fooled into thinking Cleopatra's story is just about her relationships. Her intelligence, political astuteness, and ability to navigate the murky waters of both Egyptian and Roman politics are what truly defined her legacy. Cleopatra understood that in a world dominated by men and empires, the power of perception was as crucial as the power of armies. Her story was far from over, and the next chapters would continue to blend myth and reality in a way that would captivate the ages. Cleopatra was more than just the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was a ruler who understood the eternal truth of politics, that power is both the most coveted and the most perilous of pursuits. Ah, Cleopatra, the woman who turned the world into her chessboard with Roman generals as her pawns. As the dust of Caesar's assassination settled in 44 BC, Cleopatra found herself in a precarious position. Rome was a hotbed of political intrigue, and Cleopatra needed to navigate these turbulent waters with the skill of a seasoned sailor. With Caesar gone, she had to ensure that her son, Caesarion, was recognized as Caesar's heir, a move that would secure her legacy and bolster Egypt's position. But Rome wasn't exactly lining up to embrace a foreign queen and a half-Roman son. The Roman Republic was spinning faster than a chariot wheel. Mark Antony, one of Caesar's staunchest allies, emerged as one of the power players in Rome's post-Caesar chaos. Antony was a man who combined battlefield prowess with the kind of charm that could sell sandals to a centurion. Cleopatra saw in him not just another Roman bigwig, but a potential partner in her political theater. Antony, for his part, was no stranger to Cleopatra's allure, and when they finally met in 41 BC, it was a meeting that would make even the most jaded historians sit up and take notice. Cleopatra's arrival in Tarsus to meet Antony was a spectacle tailored to impress and unsettle. She sailed up the Cydnus River on a barge decked out like the set of a Hollywood epic. Picture this: purple sails billowing in the wind, silver oars catching the sun, and Cleopatra herself reclining under a gold-embroidered canopy, channeling the goddess Aphrodite. It was a PR move so audacious it could have had its own hashtag, #QueenGoals. Antony, known for enjoying life's finer pleasures, was captivated. It was less a diplomatic meeting and more a full-blown theatrical production, with Cleopatra as the star and Antony as the enraptured audience. Antony was no fool. He saw the potential of an alliance with Cleopatra. Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world, after all. With Cleopatra, he had access to the wealth and resources needed to bolster his own ambitions back in Rome. Cleopatra, always the strategist, saw Antony as the key to maintaining her power and securing her son's future. Their alliance was sealed not just with political maneuvering, but with a personal connection that would play out against the backdrop of a world in flux. But let's not get swept away by the romance. Cleopatra and Antony's relationship was as much about power as it was passion. They were playing a high-stakes game, and the stakes were nothing less than control of the ancient world. In 34 BC, their ambitions culminated in the notorious donations of Alexandria. This was Cleopatra and Antony's grand declaration to the world, a redistribution of territories that would make any Roman senator's toga unravel. In a lavish ceremony in Alexandria, they carved up the Eastern Roman territories like a particularly contentious Thanksgiving turkey. Antony declared Cleopatra the Queen of Kings, and their children were given titles and lands, with Caesarion named King of Kings. It was a move so bold it was practically begging for a Roman backlash. Imagine your rival hosts a party and hands out your family heirlooms as party favors. That's essentially what Antony and Cleopatra did with Rome's territories. Economically, the donations were a potential boon for Egypt. Control over key regions meant increased trade opportunities and wealth. Politically, it was a double-edged sword. While it reinforced Cleopatra's position as a key player in the Mediterranean, it also painted a target on her back. Roman elites were not amused, to say the least. To them, Cleopatra was a foreign queen meddling in Roman affairs, and Antony was a traitor to his Roman roots. Seduced by the exotic charms of the East, the fallout was swift. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and Antony's rival, seized on the propaganda potential. He painted Antony as a man bewitched by Cleopatra, willing to forsake Rome for the sake of foreign decadence. Octavian's smear campaign was a masterstroke, resonating with a populace already wary of Eastern influences. Cleopatra was cast as the villainess in this Roman drama, a role she neither sought nor deserved, but one that would stick through the ages. Yet Cleopatra and Antony remained undeterred, their partnership both a personal and political statement. They shared a vision of an empire stretching across the known world, a fusion of Roman might and Egyptian wealth. It was a grand vision, bold and audacious, but it was also fraught with peril. The donations of Alexandria was less a decree and more a declaration of war, a war that would pit them against the might of Rome itself. The economic implications of their alliance were vast. Egypt was a land of abundance, its granaries overflowing with the kind of resources that could feed armies and bankroll dreams. Antony's access to these resources was a lifeline in his struggles against Octavian. Cleopatra, always the shrewd ruler, understood that wealth was power, and power was the currency of the realm. Together, they were a formidable force, but they were also on a collision course with the Roman juggernaut. As Cleopatra and Antony played house with the future of the Roman Empire, they did so with a blend of ambition and audacity that would echo through history. Their story was a testament to the complex interplay of love and power, politics and passion. It was a reminder that in the ancient world, as in ours, the line between hero and villain is often drawn not by actions, but by those who write the history books. So as Cleopatra and Antony's story unfolds, remember that beneath the romantic veneer lies a tale of calculated risks, political chess games, and the eternal struggle for power. Their alliance was a bold gamble, one that would ultimately reshape the world and leave a legacy that continues to captivate our imaginations. But don't pack up your history books just yet. The saga of Cleopatra is far from over, and the next act promises even more intrigue, drama, and the indelible mark of a queen who knew how to wield power like no other. And so, Cleopatra and Antony set the stage for a showdown with Rome that would rival any epic tale from Greek mythology. As much as their romance was fodder for poets, it was their political ambitions that would bring them to the brink. Enter Octavian, the young upstart with ambition sharper than a Roman short sword, who was busy turning Rome's opinion against the star-crossed lovers faster than you could say, Pax Romana. Now, let's talk about the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, the ancient world's equivalent of a blockbuster finale, with Cleopatra and Antony going head-to-head against Octavian. Actium was strategically located in the Ionian Sea, a place that had seen more naval action than a sailor's logbook. The stakes, control of the Roman world, the audience, the entire Mediterranean, the prize, immortality in the annals of history, or at least the chance to keep breathing. Cleopatra wasn't just tagging along for the ride. She brought to the table, quite literally, a fleet of around 60 ships, a navy that was no amateur hour operation. These weren't mere pleasure yachts. They were warships, built to withstand battle and equipped with the latest in ancient naval technology. But here's the kicker. Despite the grandeur, Cleopatra's navy was outclassed by Octavian's ships, which were more maneuverable and better suited to the choppy waters off Actium. It's a bit like bringing a fleet of luxury liners to a speedboat race. And then there was Antony, a seasoned general on land, but less of a hotshot when it came to naval strategy. He was like a fish out of water, or perhaps more accurately, a landlubber out of his depth. His decision-making was clouded by desperation and perhaps a dash of hubris. Instead of playing to his strengths, Antony committed to a naval battle he was ill-prepared for. As the saying goes, never bring a trireme to a hexam fight. Now, Octavian was no slouch in the propaganda department. He painted Cleopatra as the ultimate femme fatale, a seductive sorceress who had Antony wrapped around her finger like a piece of papyrus. His narrative was as sticky as a Greek honey cake. Cleopatra was the exotic queen who had bewitched a good Roman man, leading him to betray his homeland. It was a storyline that played well with the Roman public, who loved a good scapegoat, especially one as exotic and foreign as Cleopatra. On the day of the battle, things took a dramatic turn. The wind was against Antony and Cleopatra, both literally and figuratively. Octavian's fleet, commanded by Agrippa, a man who knew his way around a naval engagement, tightened the noose around Antony's forces. The battle was a chaotic scramble, with ships clashing, ramming, and boarding in a deadly maritime dance. And it was during this nautical melee that Cleopatra made her move. Spying the battle turning against them, she made a strategic withdrawal with her Egyptian fleet. Critics called it a retreat, but Cleopatra knew when to fold a bad hand. Her decision was pragmatic, even if it left Antony in an awkward position. As her ships sailed away, Antony's forces saw the writing on the wall, or the waves, as it were, and their morale sank faster than a lead anchor. Antony, ever the romantic, chose to follow Cleopatra, an act that sealed both their fates. What followed was a retreat to Alexandria, a city that had once been the jewel of the Mediterranean, but was now the backdrop for this final act of their saga. Their fortunes dwindled, and their allies abandoned them faster than a toga party at dawn. Cleopatra and Antony were now playing a game of survival, and the odds were stacked heavily against them. Yet, in this tale of woe, Cleopatra's shrewdness shone through. While Antony was grappling with the reality of their defeat, Cleopatra was already planning for contingencies. She sent envoys to Octavian, attempting to negotiate her and her children's safety. Ever the pragmatist, Cleopatra understood that in the cutthroat world of ancient politics, survival often depended more on negotiation than on the battlefield. Octavian, however, had other plans. He was determined to parade Cleopatra as a trophy of his triumph, a living testament to his victory over the East. But Cleopatra, knowing well the fate that awaited her as a captive in a Roman triumph, paraded through the streets of Rome only to be executed, had no intention of playing the role of a defeated queen. As the walls of Alexandria closed in, the couple's fortunes turned from grim to desperate. Antony, ever the tragic hero, was unable to reconcile with their defeat. He took his own life, in a scene as dramatic as any penned by a tragedian. Cleopatra's end was equally theatrical, shrouded in mystery and myth. The infamous asp has become the stuff of legend, but whether it was poison from a snake or a more mundane toxin, Cleopatra chose to meet death on her own terms. Their deaths marked the end of an era. With them gone, Egypt fell into Octavian's hands like a ripe fig, completing his transformation from a power-hungry triumvir to Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Cleopatra's legacy, however, lived on, both in the annals of history and the myths that would immortalize her as the quintessential queen of seduction and power. The Battle of Actium was more than just a military defeat. It was the culmination of a series of strategic missteps, political machinations, and the relentless tide of Roman expansionism. Cleopatra's navy, though formidable, was ultimately no match for the disciplined forces of Rome. Octavian's propaganda, which painted her as a villainous enchantress, was as effective a weapon as any sword or spear. And so, Cleopatra and Antony's story, filled with ambition, love, and tragedy, became a cautionary tale of the perils of mixing personal passions with political ambitions. Yet, while their downfall was swift, their legacy endured, a testament to the enduring allure of power, the complexities of human relationships, and the inexorable march of history. As we leave Cleopatra and Antony's saga hanging in the balance, remember that their story is more than just a tale of love and loss. It's a reminder of the power of narrative, the influence of propaganda, and the eternal struggle for control in a world where the stakes were nothing less than empires. But don't drop your scrolls just yet. Cleopatra's legacy continues to unfurl, and her story is far from over. Stay tuned for the final act of this epic historical drama. So here we are, at the climax of Cleopatra's saga, 30 BC, the year when history decided to turn the page on one of its most captivating chapters. The queen who had reigned with the flair of a stage actress and the cunning of a seasoned politician faced her final curtain call. But before we delve into the dramatic end, let's set the stage with a little myth-busting, shall we? First up, the infamous asp. Legend has it that Cleopatra ended her life with the bite of a venomous snake, a tale as tantalizing as it is dubious. Think about it. A queen with Cleopatra's smarts wouldn't just roll the dice on a reptile's willingness to cooperate. Snakes aren't exactly known for their reliability as instruments of royal suicide. More likely, Cleopatra, ever the strategist, opted for something less theatrical and more pragmatic: poison. A concoction brewed by her own hand, perhaps, a farewell cocktail to outwit the Roman victors. After all, Cleopatra was a woman who wrote her own scripts and wasn't about to let Octavian direct her final act. Now, let's talk about the aftermath. In the wake of Cleopatra's death, Rome swooped in to annex Egypt faster than Augustus could say, Imperium Romanum. With her demise, Egypt transformed from a proud, independent kingdom into just another province of Rome. It was a move that filled Roman coffers with Egyptian gold and grain, feeding the ever-hungry mouths of the empire. Economically, Egypt was a jackpot, a land so fertile it could make a Roman senator's eyes twinkle with dreams of endless wheat shipments and a steady influx of wealth. But Cleopatra's legacy wasn't buried with her. Her reign had left an indelible mark on Egypt's culture, one that even the mighty Rome couldn't erase. Cleopatra wasn't just a ruler. She was a cultural icon, a patron of the arts, a woman who spoke to her people in their own language, a rarity for a Ptolemaic ruler. Under her rule, Alexandria had flourished as a hub of knowledge and culture, a city that attracted scholars, artists, and philosophers. The Library of Alexandria, a beacon of learning, continued to influence the intellectual landscape of Rome long after Cleopatra's time. And let's not forget Cleopatra's influence on Roman society itself. Her presence in Rome had already planted the seeds of fascination with all things Egyptian. From fashion to religion, Roman elites couldn't resist the allure of the exotic. Isis, the Egyptian goddess whom Cleopatra was often associated with, found a new home in Roman worship. Cleopatra's image, a blend of mystery and power, became a template for future generations of women who aspired to command respect and intrigue. So why does Cleopatra continue to captivate us? Perhaps it's because her life was a kaleidoscope of contradictions. She was a queen who wielded power in a man's world, yet her story is often reduced to her romantic liaisons. She was a diplomat who played empires against each other, yet history remembers her as a seductress. The myths surrounding her death are a testament to her enduring allure, a narrative that blurs the lines between reality and legend. In the end, Cleopatra's story is a reminder of the power of narrative. It shows us how history is as much about those who write it as it is about those who live it. Cleopatra lived in an era where power was the ultimate currency, and she spent it with a finesse that left a legacy still echoing in our imaginations today. Whether we see her as a ruthless ruler or a tragic heroine, Cleopatra remains a symbol of the eternal dance between myth and reality, a dance that continues to mesmerize us centuries later. So there you have it, tale of Cleopatra, the queen who could charm generals and outwit emperors, whose life and death became the stuff of legend. Her story is a mosaic of ambition and allure, a testament to the power of a single individual to shape the world around them. And as we close this chapter of history, let's remember Cleopatra not just as the last pharaoh of Egypt, but as a woman who knew how to play the game of power better than most. After all, in the grand theater of history, Cleopatra was both the star and the director, leaving us with a story that continues to captivate, intrigue, and inspire. In the year 598, the world's newest bundle of chaos, XIII, was born in China, a land embroiled in enough family drama to make the Lannisters look like the Brady Bunch. Fast forward a couple of decades, and this kid's not just surviving, he's thriving, albeit with a bit of a bloody resume. By 626, he's Emperor Taizong of the Tang Dynasty, a title he snagged not through the usual line of succession, but by orchestrating a fratricidal coup that outdid any Shakespearean plot twist. Now, let's pull back the velvet curtain and peek at the backstage of this power grab. XIII's father, Lai Yuan, kicked off the Tang Dynasty by overthrowing the Sui Dynasty in 618. But the family wasn't exactly cozy around the dinner table. XIII, being the second son, had to deal with the medieval version of sibling rivalry, which included knives, swords, and a bit of strategic murder. The infamous Xuanwu Gate incident of 626 was the ultimate family meeting, where Lai Shimin ambushed his brothers, Lai Jiansheng and Lai Yuanji, at a gate of the imperial palace. This wasn't just a stern talking to. It was a deadly ambush that left them both dead and cleared Lai Shimin's path to the throne. It's like a Thanksgiving dinner gone horribly wrong. But instead of awkward silences, there were arrows and swords. So now he's Emperor Taizong, and he's got to spin this whole blood-soaked tale into a story of noble leadership and destiny. Enter the ancient Chinese art of PR. Taizong was a master of crafting his own legend, knowing full well that the pen, or brush, in this case, was mightier than the sword. He didn't just sit on the throne. He commissioned historians to literally write his version of history, making sure his narrative was the one that stood the test of time. He wasn't just the emperor. He was the emperor who had the best press kit in ancient China. In a move straight out of a crisis management handbook, Taizong declared his intentions were all about peace and prosperity, not just carving a name for himself in the annals of history. He reduced taxes, a classic crowd pleaser, and reformed the military, ensuring that his reign was seen as a golden age of stability and expansion. Under his leadership, the Tang Dynasty flexed its muscles over much of Central Asia, with the Silk Road becoming a bustling highway of trade and culture. Taizong was not just a ruler. He was the CEO of a booming empire with a GDP that would make modern nations blush. But let's not let the glitter of his reign blind us to the grit. Taizong had his own version of fake news to deal with, which in his era meant quashing dissent and controlling the narrative. Imagine an ancient version of spin doctors and media consultants, and you've got a sense of his court. He even had an official critic, Wei Zheng, who was tasked with pointing out the emperor's mistakes. Talk about job security through audacity. Yet, Taizong was smart enough to value dissent, at least in manageable doses, because it gave him the feedback loop needed to adjust his policies and maintain control. This emperor wasn't just sitting on his laurels. He was redefining what it meant to be a ruler in medieval China. His reign might have been built on the shaky foundations of familial betrayal, but Taizong ensured it was remembered for its achievements. With the sharp instincts of both a tactician and a storyteller, he crafted a legacy that wasn't just about power, but about the image of power. His propaganda machine, fueled by scholars and poets, painted him as a wise and benevolent leader, even if the paint was sometimes a bit too thick for the reality underneath. So, while Taizong's ascent to the throne might have been forged in the fires of familial betrayal and political maneuvering, his reign shaped an era of prosperity that has been romanticized for generations. Yet, behind every romantic tale is a gritty reality, and Taizong's story is no exception. History might be written by the victors, but in Taizong's case, it was also finely edited by the victors too. With the ink barely dry on the scrolls of his freshly edited history, Taizong was already elbow-deep in the business of empire building. Now, if you thought modern tax codes were complicated, wait until you hear about Taizong's fiscal wizardry. His tax reforms were so radical they'd have any accountant reaching for a fainting couch. You see, Taizong didn't just want a thriving economy. He wanted an economy that sang like a well-tuned guqin. First, on the chopping block, the dreaded corvée labor tax. This wasn't just about lightening the load for peasants. It was a strategic maneuver to keep the empire's gears well-oiled. Instead of forcing his subjects into unpaid labor, Taizong introduced a more flexible system where they could pay in grain or cloth. Talk about a win-win. Peasants kept more of their time, and the state got a steady supply of resources. Now, this wasn't just a benevolent stroke of genius. Oh no, it was a calculated move to ensure loyalty. Because nothing says, I care, quite like letting people keep their own hard-earned grain. But Taizong didn't stop there. He rolled out the equal field system, which sounds like something straight out of a utopian novel, but was actually a pragmatic attempt to prevent land monopolies. Under this system, land was distributed based on the number of people in a household, ensuring that even the humblest farmer had a plot to call their own. This was less about altruism and more about maintaining a stable and productive agrarian base. But hey, who says you can't be both strategic and slightly benevolent? Now, onto the legal landscape, where Taizong's reforms were nothing short of revolutionary. Picture a book of laws so thorough that it would make any legal scholar weep with admiration or confusion, depending on the day. The Tang Code, established in 624, was a comprehensive legal framework that laid down the law in a way that was both detailed and surprisingly humane for its time. It was like the Swiss Army knife of legal systems, covering everything from theft to public conduct. This code wasn't just a legal document, it was a cultural touchstone, influencing Chinese legal systems for centuries. Taizong wasn't one to just hand down laws and call it a day. Nope, he was the kind of emperor who liked to micromanage with the enthusiasm of a modern-day CEO who color-codes his calendar. He was known to personally review legal cases, ensuring that justice was served, or at least that it aligned with his vision of the state. Imagine being a judge, only to have the emperor pop in with a casual, "Mind if I take a look at that case file?" Talk about pressure. In the realm of public administration, Taizong's penchant for micromanagement extended to the creation of a bureaucratic machine that would make any HR department green with envy. He reorganized the government into 6 ministries, each with its own specific function, from military affairs to civil appointments. This wasn't just about efficiency, it was about control. By keeping a tight grip on the administrative structure, Taizong ensured that the empire ran like a well-oiled machine, or at least as close as you can get when dealing with human nature. And speaking of human nature, let's not ignore Taizong's flair for the dramatic. He had a knack for turning even the most mundane policy decisions into grand spectacles. Take his infamous 12 Decrees, for instance, a series of proclamations that read like a to-do list for a nation. These decrees covered everything from agricultural practices to the behavior of officials, all delivered with the kind of gravitas that would make any TED talk look like a casual chat. But don't let the spectacle fool you. Beneath the pomp and circumstance was a shrewd understanding of political optics. By positioning himself as both a benevolent ruler and a hands-on manager, Taizong crafted an image that was as much about perception as it was about policy. He knew that in the Game of Thrones, or in this case, the game of dynasties, perception was half the battle. In the end, Taizong's domestic policies weren't just about keeping the wheels of empire turning. They were about crafting a legacy that would stand the test of time, even if that meant occasionally glossing over the more unsavory details. After all, history is written by the victors, but it's edited by those who know how to spin a good yarn. So while Taizong might have started his reign with a body count that could rival any gangster flick, he ended up laying the groundwork for what many consider China's golden age. Through a mix of savvy policy-making, legal innovation, and a healthy dose of personal oversight, he turned the Tang Dynasty into a powerhouse that would be studied and mythologized for centuries to come. And as he looked out over his empire, one can only imagine Taizong might have mused, not bad for a guy who started out as the second son. And while Taizong might have gazed over his prosperous realm, his ambitions stretched far beyond the borders of China. Enter stage right, the grand theater of foreign policy and military conquest, a realm where Taizong transformed from an emperor into something akin to a medieval action hero. He was like a blend of Sun Tzu and Genghis Khan, but with the added benefit of a well-dressed court chronicler to make sure his hair always looked good in the official portraits. One of the most iconic episodes of Taizong's martial career was the Battle of Hulao in 621. Now, before you get too swept up in the romance of clashing swords and galloping horses, let's set the scene. This wasn't just a case of Taizong waking up one morning and deciding it was a good day for a battle. The stakes were high, and the chessboard was already cluttered with players. The Sui dynasty had collapsed faster than a souffle in a thunderstorm, and the ensuing chaos was a free-for-all buffet for warlords and would-be emperors. The Battle of Hulao was part of Taizong's campaign against Wang Shichang, a rival warlord who fancied himself as the emperor of his own little slice of China. Wang had teamed up with another contender, Du Giant, creating a formidable alliance that threatened Taizong's ambitions like a thorn in his imperial side. So, in true action movie style, Taizong decided it was time to bring the hammer down. Picture Taizong, not just as a ruler, but as the leading man in an ancient epic. He took to the battlefield personally, not content to let generals hog all the glory. At Hulao, his forces numbered around 50,000, facing off against a coalition of about 100,000. Those are some serious odds, folks. enough to make even the boldest of commanders reach for their abacuses and rethink their strategy. But Taizong wasn't just about numbers. It was about tactics. He pulled a classic maneuver straight from the art of war: divide and conquer. By engaging Wang Shichang's forces first and securing a swift victory, he was able to isolate Du Jian's army. It was like a game of ancient Risk, only with more dust and fewer dice. The strategy worked, and Taizong emerged victorious, with the added bonus of capturing Du Jian, an outcome that must have looked great on his resume. Yet, let's not get too caught up in the glory without peeking behind the velvet curtain. War, as much as it's romanticized, is a costly business, and Taizong's campaigns were no exception. The Battle of Hulao wasn't just a triumph for Taizong. It was an economic drain that made the empire's coffers wheeze under the pressure. Warfare is expensive, and while the Tang Dynasty was rich, each campaign nibbled away at the treasury like a swarm of locusts at a banquet. Resources had to be allocated, soldiers paid, and supplies maintained across vast distances. A logistical nightmare that would have made any quartermaster break out in a cold sweat. And then there's the human cost. Taizong's military ventures, while strategically brilliant, left a trail of devastation that's often glossed over in the romantic retellings. The fields of Hulao weren't just a backdrop for Taizong's triumph. They were a graveyard for thousands. War isn't just a clash of steel. It's a cacophony of human suffering that echoes long after the last sword is sheathed. As much as Taizong's military prowess is celebrated, it's worth remembering that every victory came at a steep price, one that was paid in blood, sweat, and tears. But let's not pretend Taizong was some reckless warmonger. His campaigns weren't just about personal glory. They were strategic moves in a complex game of geopolitical chess. By consolidating power and stabilizing the region, he ensured that the Tang Dynasty could flourish economically and culturally. The Silk Road, that ancient highway of trade and ideas, thrived under his rule, connecting China to the far reaches of the known world. The empire became a melting pot of cultures, with goods, philosophies, and people flowing in and out like a vibrant tapestry of human interaction. Taizong also knew the value of diplomacy, using marriage alliances and treaties as deftly as he wielded a sword. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a statesman, understanding that the true power of an empire lay not just in its armies, but in its ability to influence and integrate. His reign saw the Tang Dynasty become a beacon of stability in a world that often seemed to be teetering on the brink of chaos. As we dig deeper into Taizong's foreign policies, it's clear that his vision for empire wasn't just about borders and battles. It was about creating a world where the Tang Dynasty could not only survive, but thrive. One where the emperor's influence stretched far beyond the confines of China's mountains and rivers. And while the romantic image of Taizong as a warrior emperor is compelling, it's the complexities and contradictions of his rule that make his story truly fascinating. So as we move forward, let's keep in mind that history, much like Taizong himself, is a multifaceted beast. For every story of conquest and glory, there's a hidden cost and a lesson to be learned. Taizong's legacy isn't just one of power and ambition. It's a testament to the intricate dance of war, diplomacy, and economics that defined an era. And as we continue to unravel the tapestry of his reign, remember, behind every legend lies a gritty reality, and it's in the interplay of these elements that the true story of Taizong's empire unfolds. Now, as the Tang Dynasty's borders were being drawn in blood and diplomacy, Emperor Taizong was sketching another kind of map, a cultural renaissance that would leave its mark on history as indelibly as any military conquest. You see, Taizong wasn't content with just being a sword-wielding emperor. He also fancied himself as something of a Renaissance man, several centuries early. He was the kind of ruler who could strategize a battle in the morning and critique a poem in the afternoon, perhaps even while sipping on a nice cup of tea. Taizong's passion for culture was like a breath of fresh air in the Tang court, and he wielded it as strategically as any political or military maneuver. He understood that the arts were more than just decorative flair. They were a tool of soft power, a means to bolster his image and leave a legacy that shone brighter than any gold-plated throne. So, he rolled out the red carpet for poets, painters, and philosophers, turning his court into a veritable salon of artistic innovation. It was like the Met Gala of the 7th century, just with more robes and fewer celebrity endorsements. Now, Poetry was the superstar of this Tang Dynasty cultural revival, and Taizong was its biggest fanboy. He didn't just support poets, he idolized them. It said he could quote lines of verse with the fervor of a modern-day teenager reciting song lyrics. The emperor's court was a veritable who's who of literary talent, featuring the likes of Wang Bo and Yang Jiang, who would later be immortalized as part of the four greats of the early Tang. These poets crafted verses that captured the grandeur of the Tang Empire, blending themes of nature, philosophy, and politics with deft strokes of calligraphy. But let's talk about Taizong's love for flattery, because it's here that things get delightfully awkward. The emperor's appetite for praise was insatiable, and his court poets were more than happy to oblige. Some of the poetry readings at court could only be described as cringeworthy, with verses so syrupy sweet they'd give you a toothache. You can imagine the court scribes rolling their eyes as yet another poet stood up to extol the virtues of Taizong's benevolence, wisdom, and, of course, his impeccable taste in the arts. These poems were as predictable as a Hallmark movie, yet Taizong lapped them up with the gusto of a kid in a candy store. Of course, not all court culture was so saccharine. The era also saw the rise of more critical voices, such as the aforementioned Wai Zheng, a man brave enough to point out when the emperor's new poems had no clothes, metaphorically speaking. Wai Zheng's role was to keep Taizong grounded in reality, a job that was part critique, part survival tactic. It's one thing to be the emperor's critic, it's another to do it without losing your head, literally. Yet, Taizong valued this dissent, understanding that a little constructive criticism could go a long way in maintaining the empire's integrity. While the arts flourished, the darker underbelly of court politics simmered like a pot, threatening to boil over. Intrigue was as much a part of the Tang court as poetry readings, and Taizong navigated it with the cunning of a chess master eyeing a checkmate. The court was a place where alliances were forged over tea and shattered over dinner, where a misplaced word could end a career, or worse. It was a high-stakes game where the players wore silk robes instead of armor, but the stakes were just as lethal. Court life, for all its glittering facade, was fraught with danger. It was a realm where eunuchs wielded power like puppeteers, manipulating figures behind the scenes. These were men who had been stripped of their ability to sire heirs, but compensated by amassing influence like a hoarder collects trinkets. They were the gatekeepers of the emperor's inner sanctum, and navigating their web of alliances was a skill as crucial as any military tactic. Yet, even in the midst of this political tightrope walk, Taizong managed to create a court culture that was as vibrant as it was precarious. He understood that the arts were not just a reflection of his empire's glory, but a means to project it beyond its borders. Through cultural exchanges along the Silk Road, Chinese art and literature found eager audiences in places as diverse as Persia, India, and the Byzantine Empire. It was cultural diplomacy at its finest, a way to extend the Tang dynasty's influence without unsheathing a single sword. This wasn't just about spreading Chinese culture. It was about absorbing the best of what the world had to offer. Taizong was a patron of Buddhist art and architecture, commissioning grand temples that were as much statements of power as they were places of worship. Monks and scholars traveled between China and India, exchanging ideas and texts that would shape the spiritual landscape of Asia for centuries. The emperor's support for Buddhism wasn't just spiritual window dressing. It was a calculated move to unify his diverse subjects under a common cultural banner. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking this cultural renaissance was all sunshine and rainbows. The reality was as complex as a Tang poem, with layers of intrigue and conflict simmering beneath the surface. For every poet who found favor at court, there were countless others who languished in obscurity, victims of a system that could be as capricious as it was generous. The same could be said of the artists who adorned the walls of palaces with their masterpieces, each brushstroke a testament to both the grandeur and the vanity of their imperial patron. Yet, despite the court's intrigues and the occasional bad poetry, Taizong's cultural policies left a legacy that would echo through the ages. His reign saw the Tang dynasty reach the zenith of its cultural achievements, a golden age that will be remembered as one of the most vibrant periods in Chinese history. The arts were not just a reflection of the emperor's power. They were an extension of it, a way to shape the narrative of his reign and cement his place in the annals of history. As we wrap up this chapter, it's clear that Taizong's legacy is as multifaceted as the empire he ruled. His cultural patronage was a strategic masterpiece, a means to bolster his image and extend his influence in ways that swords and soldiers never could. Yet, beneath the gilded veneer of court life lay a web of politics and intrigue that could ensnare even the most cautious of players. It's a story of art and ambition, where the lines between romance and reality blur like ink on a page. And as we turn to the next chapter of Taizong's reign, remember, history is as much about what is said as it is about what is left unsaid. As the curtain fell on Emperor Taizong's life in 649, China found itself at a crossroads, much like a rock band after the charismatic lead singer leaves. Do they continue the tour or risk fading into obscurity? Taizong's reign was the stuff of legends, a golden age where the empire sparkled like a freshly minted coin. But as history often reminds us, even the shiniest coins can have a bit of tarnish lurking beneath the gleam. With Taizong's departure, the spotlight turned to his successors, who were tasked with the daunting job of filling shoes that might as well have been made of solid gold. Enter Emperor Gaozong, Taizong's son, who ascended the throne with the enthusiasm of a man handed the keys to a Ferrari, but unsure how to drive stick. Gaozong's reign was marked by attempts to sustain the momentum of his father's achievements while grappling with his own limitations. His rule was like trying to perform a high-wire act without a safety net, admirable, but prone to the occasional wobble. Under Gaozong, the Tang Dynasty continued to expand, but it was a bit like stretching a rubber band to its limits. Sure, the borders grew, but so did the challenges. The empire's economy, while robust, was under strain, much like a teenager's allowance stretched thin by a sudden interest in designer sneakers. Gaozong faced the unenviable task of maintaining the empire's prosperity in the face of mounting pressures, both internal and external. Politically, Gaozong's reign was a veritable soap opera, replete with court intrigue that would make even the most seasoned scriptwriter break out in a cold sweat. The infamous Empress Wu Zetian, Gaozong's wife, was a formidable figure who wielded power with the finesse of a chess grandmaster eyeing a checkmate. Wu wasn't content with being a mere footnote in history. She aimed for the whole chapter. Her influence was both a boon and a bane, as she maneuvered through court politics with a skill that would eventually see her become the first, and only, female emperor of China. Yet, while Gaozong and Wu Zetian navigated the choppy waters of empire, the legacy of Taizong loomed large, casting a shadow that was as much a guide as it was a challenge. The myth of Taizong's golden age was a double-edged sword, offering a model of prosperity while setting a benchmark that was nearly impossible to meet. The truth is, Taizong's era, for all its glitter, had its share of grit. His expansionist policies had stretched resources thin, and his economic reforms, while groundbreaking, were not without their pitfalls. Take, for instance, the equal field system, which on paper looked like a utopian dream, but in practice was more of a logistical nightmare. The system aimed to distribute land fairly among households, but as the empire expanded, maintaining such equality became as tricky as balancing a house of cards on a windy day. The reality was a bureaucratic quagmire that often led to more inequality rather than less, as powerful families found ways to game the system, accumulating land like it was going out of style. Moreover, Taizong's military campaigns, while successful, left a legacy of strained relations and depleted coffers. The Silk Road might have been bustling with trade, but it was also a highway for conflict, with border skirmishes and rebellions as frequent as potholes on a poorly maintained road. The costs of such an empire were steep, and Gaozong inherited both the glory and the burdens of his father's ambitions. Culturally, Taizong's patronage of the arts left a vibrant legacy that Gaozong struggled to maintain amid the political turbulence. The court poets, once the darlings of Taizong's reign, found themselves navigating a landscape where their verses were as likely to be met with applause as with political repercussions. The arts continued to flourish, but the tone shifted, reflecting the complexities of a court where allegiances were as fleeting as a summer breeze. In the grand tapestry of history, Taizong's reign is often remembered as a golden age, and rightly so. It was a period of remarkable achievement and cultural brilliance. Yet, like all golden ages, it was not without its tarnish. The realities of empire building are never as glamorous as the legends suggest, and the challenges faced by Taizong's successors highlight the precarious balance between myth and reality. As we sift through the layers of history, it's clear that Taizong's legacy is one of both triumph and caution. His reign set a standard that was as inspiring as it was daunting, a reminder that even the most illustrious periods have their dark corners. The Tang Dynasty, under Taizong, reached heights that would echo through the ages, but the path forward was as fraught with peril as it was with promise. In the end, the story of Taizong and his successors is a testament to the complexities of power, the interplay of ambition and legacy, and the inevitable march of history. It's a tale where the romance of a golden age is tempered by the grit of reality, where the past serves as both a beacon and a warning. And as we close the chapter on Taizong's reign, we're left with a poignant reminder. History, much like life, is a tapestry woven from both light and shadow, and it's in the interplay of these elements that the true narrative unfolds. In the grand theatre of Chinese history, the fall of the Sui dynasty is less Shakespearean tragedy and more a cautionary tale about biting off more than you can chew. The Sui, barely holding onto power between 581 and 618 CE, were a bit like that overambitious friend who tries to host a dinner party, renovate their apartment, and start a new job all in the same week. Spoiler alert, it did not end well. By the time the Tang dynasty emerged, the Sui had managed to rack up a laundry list of failures that would make even a reality TV show blush. At its height, the Sui dynasty decided it could reunite China, a noble cause, and spent enormous resources on grandiose projects, including the infamous Grand Canal. You know, just a little 100-mile waterway connecting the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, completed in record time with the kind of labor practices that would make even the most ruthless corporate tycoon wince. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This was no ordinary canal. It was Emperor Yang of Sui's magnum opus, a marvel of engineering that also doubled as a logistical nightmare. While the emperor was busy digging trenches, he may have forgotten the first rule of leadership. Don't exhaust your people to the point of rebellion. As you might guess, the Sui's downfall wasn't exactly a slow burn. It was more of a spectacular collapse under the weight of its own ambition. By the time Emperor Yang was assassinated in 618 CE, courtesy of a coup sparked by his own disgruntled generals, the dynasty had run out of luck and support faster than a one-hit wonder band. Enter Lai Yuan, a man with a strategic mind and timing so impeccable it makes Swiss watches look sloppy. Lai Yuan, also known as Emperor Geazu, wasn't just some aristocrat with a catchy name. He was a military governor with a knack for alliances and a family tree that was practically a who's who of power players. Lai Yuan's rise was less about divine right and more about seizing the moment. As the Sui crumbled, Lai Yuan saw the chaos as a ladder. With strategic foresight, he allied with the right people, people who could swing a sword and had a bone to pick with the Sui, and launched a rebellion that felt more like a well-choreographed dance than a ragtag uprising. By June of 618, Lai Yuan had declared himself the first emperor of the Tang dynasty, proving that sometimes all you need to conquer a fragmented empire is a keen sense of timing and the audacity to rewrite the rules. But let's not romanticize this coup as some sort of noble uprising led by a gallant hero on a white horse. The reality was a muddy, bloody, and often downright grim affair. Ancient coup-making wasn't all grand speeches and glorious battles. It was a nitty-gritty slog through betrayal, backstabbing, and the occasional well-placed bribe. In the political chess game of 7th century China, Lai Yuan played his pieces brilliantly, but not without a few rooks lost along the way. The Tang Dynasty, named after the fabled Tang of Shang, who supposedly invented everything from music to the wheel, depending on which scroll you're reading, was poised to take advantage of the Sui's missteps. They brought with them a vision of stability and prosperity, a vision that was desperately needed after the Sui's over-ambitious chaos. Lai Yuan's knack for organizing and his ability to rally the fragmented factions under one banner set the stage for what would become a golden era in Chinese history. But the road to Tang glory was paved with anything but gold. It required navigating the complex tapestry of loyalties and rivalries that defined the period. Lai Yuan didn't just inherit an empire, He inherited a mess of epic proportions. Bandits roamed the countryside, local warlords wielded more power than a small country, and the common people were exhausted by years of forced labor and heavy taxation. Yet, against this backdrop, Lai Yuan managed to establish a dynasty that would last nearly 3 centuries, a feat in itself, considering the average lifespan of a dynasty was about as long as a fruit flies. One could say that Lai Yuan's success was a testament to his ability to blend the practical with the visionary. His early reign was characterized by reforms that were both pragmatic and forward-thinking. He reduced taxes, reformed the legal code, and generally tried to put the brakes on the runaway train that was the Sui's overextended military campaigns. In essence, Lai Yuan was the ancient equivalent of a CEO brought in to save a failing company, and his strategies worked better than a catchy jingle at winning over the populace. As the dust settled from the Sui's spectacular implosion, the Tang dynasty began to take shape. It was a dynasty that would eventually bring forth cultural and economic prosperity, setting the stage for a renaissance of sorts in Chinese history. But before the poetry and the art, before the trade routes and the diplomacy, there was a man named Lai Yuan, a series of well-timed decisions, and a whole lot of political savvy. In the end, the rise of the Tang wasn't just about the fall of the Sui. It was about turning chaos into opportunity, and opportunity into legacy. As the curtain rose on the Tang dynasty's next act, Lai Yuan's son, Lai Shimin, soon to be Emperor Taizong, stepped into the spotlight with all the ambition of a startup founder eyeing an IPO. The year was 626 CE, and Taizong didn't just inherit a burgeoning empire. He inherited a political minefield. Yet, with a blend of intellectual acumen and a touch of ruthlessness, he maneuvered through it like a chess grandmaster eyeing checkmate. First, let's talk about Taizong's approach to diplomacy. It wasn't all sunshine and peace treaties. Sometimes it involved clearing the board of a few problematic pieces. Exhibit A, the Xuanwu Gate incident. Now, if you think your family gatherings are awkward, imagine plotting a coup against your own brothers. In a move that would make any Shakespearean drama look like a sitcom, Taizong eliminated his rivals in a bloody palace coup, securing his position as the next emperor. It was a brutal reminder that in the Game of Thrones, you either win or you end up on the wrong side of history. With the family drama sorted, Taizong turned his gaze outward, expanding the empire's borders like a real estate mogul on a power trip. He didn't just add a few provinces to the map. He extended Tang influence into Central Asia, absorbing territories and establishing protectorates that would make any imperialist envious. By the time he was done, the Tang dynasty's reach stretched from the Korean peninsula to the borders of Persia, with a military prowess that would make even the most formidable generals take note. The secret, a robust and disciplined army, strengthened through reforms, and a keen understanding of logistics that rivaled a modern military strategist. Taizong's reign wasn't just about conquering new lands, it was about keeping them. Enter the bureaucratic system, as intricate as a clockwork puzzle, but somehow more efficient. While the Sui had laid the groundwork with their centralized model, Taizong perfected it. He implemented the 3 departments and 6 ministries system, a governmental structure that could rival any modern state's labyrinthine bureaucracy. It's almost poetic how the same system that could drive a person to madness with its complexity also kept the empire running smoothly, much like how a tax code keeps accountants employed. But what's an empire without economic stability? Taizong understood that prosperity wasn't just about land and power. It required a thriving economy. He introduced land redistribution policies under the equal field system, which aimed to provide every male adult with a plot of land sufficient for his needs. It was an agrarian dream. Well, unless you were a rich landowner, in which case it felt more like a nightmare. The system wasn't perfect, but it set the stage for an agricultural boom that fed the empire and lined its coffers. Speaking of coffers, Taizong wasn't just hoarding wealth like a dragon in a fairy tale. He knew that trade was the lifeblood of the empire, and he opened the Silk Road like a savvy entrepreneur launching an e-commerce site. This wasn't just about silk and spices. It was about ideas and culture traveling along those dusty paths, turning the Tang capital of Chang'an into a cosmopolitan hub that would make any modern city look provincial by comparison. With bustling markets and diverse inhabitants, Chang'an was the epicenter of a cultural renaissance that blended Chinese traditions with influences from across Asia and beyond. Yet, for all his successes, Taizong's reign wasn't without its myths and misconceptions. Some might paint him as the benevolent ruler ushering in a golden age, but the truth is more layered. Yes, he was an enlightened leader who welcomed scholars and intellectuals to his court, but he was also a pragmatic ruler who understood that sometimes hard decisions had to be made to maintain order. It wasn't all poetry and prosperity. There were taxes to be collected and rebellions to quash. In the end, Taizong's legacy was one of balance between power and diplomacy, tradition and innovation, expansion and consolidation. He didn't just build an empire, he built a system that could sustain it, one that would serve as a model for centuries to come. As we look back, it's clear that Taizong's reign was a masterclass in the art of governance, a testament to the idea that sometimes the best way to secure the future is to understand the past. The Tang Dynasty wasn't just a chapter in history, it was a turning point, a time when China wasn't just a country, but a civilization at its peak. And while Taizong's reign laid the foundations, the story of the Tang is far from over. As the dynasty continued to evolve, it would face new challenges and opportunities, setting the stage for an era of unprecedented cultural and economic growth. But that's a tale for another time, as the journey of the Tang Dynasty is one that continues to unfold, with each chapter more compelling than the last. As the Tang Dynasty continued to evolve, it became a dazzling tapestry of cultural and economic brilliance, with Chang'an at its heart. A city that, if you squinted just right, looked like the Manhattan of its time, minus the skyscrapers but with way more pagodas. This wasn't just any city. It was the cosmopolitan epicenter of the 8th century, where the Silk Road ended, or began, depending on your perspective, and poetry, trade, and innovation mingled like guests at a particularly fabulous soiree. Chang'an was a city teeming with life, where the air buzzed with the chatter of merchants, scholars, and artisans from every corner of the known world. It was here that the Tang Dynasty's cultural renaissance truly came to life, fueled by the rich tapestry of influences that flowed along the Silk Road. Imagine a place where Persian traders haggled with Chinese silk merchants, where Indian monks exchanged philosophies with Confucian scholars, and where Turkic horsemen could be seen alongside Arab envoys. It was as if the world had shrunk down and gathered in one place, each culture bringing its own unique flavor to the melting pot that was Tang China. But what truly set this era apart was its poets, the rock stars of their time, who captured the essence of Tang society in verse that still resonates today. Lai Bai and Du Fu were the Lennon and McCartney of 8th century China, their poetry a lyrical dance between the mundane and the divine. These were not just poets, they were cultural icons, their works reflecting the glories and struggles of their age. Lai Bai, with his penchant for wine and wanderlust, wrote verses that soared with imagination and longing. Meanwhile, Du Fu, the more grounded of the two, chronicled the harsh realities of war and poverty with a stark, haunting beauty. Their poetry was as much a part of the Tang Dynasty as its emperors and generals, an artistic testament to the era's complexity. The Silk Road, that ancient trade network, was the lifeline that connected Chang'an to the wider world. Stretching over 4,000 miles, it was less a road and more a series of interconnected trade routes, a bustling corridor of commerce that brought goods and ideas from as far as Rome and India. Silk, spices, precious stones, and even exotic animals made their way across these routes, but so too did technologies, religions, and philosophies. The exchange was not just economic but intellectual, as Buddhist teachings traveled eastward and Chinese inventions like paper-making spread westward. Yet, all this grandeur and exchange came at a cost. The Tang Dynasty's coffers were significantly strained by the need to maintain such a vast, interconnected empire. Keeping the Silk Road safe from bandits and marauding nomads required a military presence that was neither small nor cheap. The empire's vast bureaucracy, while efficient, was also a financial burden, demanding a steady stream of revenue to keep the wheels of government turning smoothly. And let's not forget the lavish lifestyles of the Tang elite, whose tastes for foreign luxuries and grandiose projects often outstripped the state's resources. The cost of cultural grandeur was a precarious balancing act, a dance between prosperity and overreach that would eventually contribute to the dynasty's decline. Despite these challenges, the Tang dynasty's cultural achievements were undeniable. The era saw advancements not only in poetry and trade, but also in technology and science. Innovations such as woodblock printing revolutionized the spread of information, making texts more accessible and helping to democratize knowledge. The development of gunpowder, originally discovered by alchemists searching for the elixir of life, would eventually change the face of warfare, though in the Tang era it was mostly used for fireworks and ceremonial displays. Amidst this backdrop of cultural flourishing, the Tang dynasty also grappled with its own internal contradictions. The empire's embrace of foreign cultures was both its strength and its vulnerability. On the one hand, the cosmopolitan nature of Tang society fostered an environment of innovation and creativity. On the other hand, it also led to tensions and xenophobia, as native Chinese sometimes viewed the influx of foreign ideas and people with suspicion and resentment. This cultural push and pull was epitomized in the Invention rebellion of 755, a catastrophic uprising partly fueled by ethnic tensions and economic grievances, which would have profound consequences for the Tang dynasty's stability. In the end, the Tang era was one of both grandeur and grit, a time when the echoes of poetry and the clink of coins could be heard in the streets of Chang'an. It was a period that embodied the best and worst of what an empire could be, a testament to the heights of human achievement and the depths of its ambition. As we look back, it's clear that the Tang dynasty was not just a golden age of Chinese civilization, but a pivotal chapter in world history, a reminder that the pursuit of cultural and economic splendor is often a double-edged sword. Yet, for all its complexities, the Tang era remains a shining beacon of what was possible when cultures collide and create something truly extraordinary. And with that, the story of the Tang dynasty's cultural renaissance continues, with more chapters yet to unfold in this remarkable saga of history. As the Tang dynasty's cultural tapestry wove itself ever richer, it wasn't all silk and poetry beneath the imperial grandeur. Instead, it was more like a patchwork quilt, beautiful from a distance, but full of seams and stitches up close. Take the Invention rebellion of 755, a historical plot twist that would give Game of Thrones a run for its money. This wasn't just a minor skirmish. It was an upheaval that threatened to unravel the entire Tang fabric with a force that could rival 1,000 angry Reddit threads. Picture this. Invention, a military general of mixed Sogdian and Turkic descent, was the kind of charismatic leader who could rally troops just by showing up. But he wasn't exactly a poster boy for loyalty. Invention had managed to climb the ranks of the Tang military, gaining the trust of Emperor Xuanzang, and even becoming the adopted son of the emperor's favorite concubine, Yang Gaifai. Talk about keeping your friends close and your frenemies closer. But the love fest didn't last. By 755, Invention had amassed a private army of over 150,000 troops, a medieval linked-in network with a deadly twist, and declared himself emperor of a rival dynasty, sparking a civil war that would rage for nearly 8 years. Now, you might wonder how this all unraveled so quickly. Well, the Tang dynasty, with its sprawling borders and multicultural population, was a bit like a patchy Wi-Fi connection, strong in some areas, weak in others. The empire's rapid expansion had stretched its military thin, and regional governors had more autonomy than a teenager with a smartphone. Invention took advantage of this decentralized power structure, rallying discontented soldiers and local elites who were fed up with the Tang's heavy taxation and bureaucratic inefficiencies. Talk about a perfect storm of grievances. The rebellion's impact was nothing short of catastrophic. Millions of civilians were caught in the crossfire, with estimates suggesting that the population of the empire plummeted from about 53 million to 33 million. The capital, Chang'an, was captured and ransacked, leaving a trail of destruction that would make a Viking raid look like a polite visit. The economic toll was equally staggering, as trade routes were disrupted and agricultural lands were devastated, leading to widespread famine and poverty. But why did Invention's rebellion resonate so deeply with the populace? Simply put, it was a perfect case of imperial overreach meeting grassroots dissatisfaction. The Tang dynasty's ambitious policies, while culturally enriching, had created a society where the elite dined on foreign delicacies while the peasantry scrounged for scraps. The empire's bureaucracy, once the pride of Chinese governance, had become a bloated beast, more concerned with maintaining its own power than addressing the needs of the people. In this climate, and Lushan's promise of reform and stability was a siren call to those disillusioned by the Tang's excesses. Yet, for all its devastating consequences, the rebellion also highlighted the resilience of the Tang dynasty. The imperial forces, though initially caught off guard, eventually rallied under the leadership of loyalist generals like Guozi and Lai Guangbai. These commanders, with their strategic cunning and military prowess, managed to turn the tide against the rebels, reclaiming lost territories and restoring a semblance of order. It was a testament to the underlying strength of the Tang system, even as it staggered under the weight of its internal contradictions. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the Tang dynasty faced a reckoning. The once great empire had been shaken to its core, and the need for reform was undeniable. The government, recognizing the dangers of overexpansion and centralized power, began to scale back its ambitions, focusing instead on consolidating its hold over remaining territories. Land reforms aimed at reducing the power of large estates were introduced, and efforts were made to streamline the bureaucracy, though with mixed success. The rebellion also forced the Tang leadership to reckon with the cultural tensions simmering beneath the surface of their cosmopolitan society. While the empire had long prided itself on its openness to foreign influences, the Lushan rebellion exposed the dark underbelly of this multiculturalism, xenophobia and ethnic strife. Lushan himself, with his foreign origins, became a symbol of the outsider within, prompting a backlash against non-Chinese peoples and cultures that would shape Tang policy in the years to come. In the grand scheme of things, the Lushan rebellion served as both a cautionary tale and a turning point. It underscored the perils of unchecked ambition and the importance of addressing the grievances of the governed. The Tang dynasty, once a beacon of cultural and economic brilliance, was now forced to grapple with the reality that even the most glittering empire could be brought low by its own excesses. As the dust settled and the empire sought to rebuild, the question remained: could the Tang dynasty find a sustainable path forward, or was its golden era destined to be a fleeting moment in the annals of history? The answer to this question would unfold in the years to come, as the Tang leaders sought to balance their imperial ambitions with the practical realities of governance. It was a delicate dance, one that required vision, pragmatism, and a willingness to learn from past mistakes. As the dynasty continued to evolve, it would need to navigate a landscape fraught with challenges and opportunities, setting the stage for the next chapter in this epic saga of human endeavor. Stay tuned, because the story of the Tang dynasty is far from over, and the best, or perhaps the worst, is yet to come. And so, with the Tang dynasty teetering on the edge of chaos, it was time to confront the harsh truth. Even an empire that had once dazzled like a fireworks display could find itself mired in dysfunction, as if it had become the setting for a particularly tangled medieval soap opera. Picture a bureaucracy so convoluted that it made modern tax codes look straightforward. The Tang government, in its later years, was like an overgrown garden, once vibrant and organized, now choked with weeds of corruption and inefficiency. The decline was marked by a series of internal and external pressures that would make even the most optimistic emperor reach for a stiff drink. Internally, the empire was strained by power struggles that erupted as frequently as celebrity feuds on social media. Take the Huang Kao rebellion in 874, a peasant uprising that turned into a full-blown civil war, ravaging the empire for nearly a decade. Huang Kao, a salt smuggler turned rebel leader, managed to capture the capital of Chang'an not once, but twice. His rebellion was a stark reminder of the empire's inability to address the grievances of its people, with famine and heavy taxation acting as the perfect storm for discontent. Externally, the Tang dynasty found itself besieged by the same nomadic tribes it had once dominated. The Tibetan Empire, riding high on its newfound power, was a constant thorn in the Tang side, launching raids that would make any border guard's hair stand on end. Meanwhile, the Khitan and other steppe peoples took advantage of the empire's weakened state chipping away at its borders like termites at a wooden foundation. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The real kicker was the Tang's bureaucratic bloat. Imagine a government so entangled in its own red tape that it could rival the plot of a daytime soap. By the 9th century, the Tang administration had become a caricature of itself, with officials more interested in lining their own pockets than in governance. Positions were often bought rather than earned through merit, a fact that would have Confucius spinning in his grave. The civil service exams, once a beacon of fairness, had degenerated into a farce, where passing was more about who you knew than what you knew. The fiscal strain was no laughing matter either. The empire's coffers, once overflowing thanks to the Silk Road trade, were now as empty as a rider's bank account. Inflation ran rampant, and the government resorted to desperate measures, like printing more money and imposing even heavier taxes, the economic equivalent of putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. By the time the Tang finally collapsed in 907, the empire was a shadow of its former self, its lands divided among warlords like a pie at a family reunion where everyone forgot to bring a knife. Yet, for all its chaos, the Tang dynasty left an indelible mark on China's historical and cultural landscape. It was a period that redefined what was possible, a time when poetry, art, and philosophy reached new heights. The Tang's legacy is a reminder that even the most spectacular falls from grace can leave behind a foundation for future greatness. The Song dynasty, which rose from the ashes of the Tang, would inherit this cultural wealth, building upon it to create its own golden age. As we reflect on the Tang's rise and fall, it becomes clear that history is a fickle friend, often repeating itself with uncanny accuracy. The Tang dynasty's story is one of ambition and overreach, of cultural brilliance and bureaucratic decay. It serves as a timeless cautionary tale of the perils of neglecting the needs of the people and the dangers of an unchecked bureaucracy. But it's also a testament to the resilience of human creativity and the enduring power of cultural exchange. In the grand tapestry of history, the Tang dynasty is both a warning and an inspiration. It reminds us that even in the midst of decline, there are lessons to be learned and legacies to be cherished. As we look back on this era, we find that the past is not just a distant memory, but a mirror reflecting our own hopes, dreams, and follies. And so, we say farewell to the Tang dynasty, with all its triumphs and tragedies, its poetry and politics, knowing that its story will continue to echo through the ages. A reminder that even the mightiest empires are, in the end, only human. On a bright May morning in 1610, the streets of Paris were alive with the sound of clattering hooves and bustling crowds, all eyes on one young boy whose life was about to take a dramatic turn. Meet Louis Roman XIII, just 9 years old, already carrying the weight of a crown heavier than any school backpack. His father, Henry Roman IV, had just been assassinated, leaving little Louis to inherit the French throne. Talk about being thrown into the deep end, no floaties included. Now, being a child king might sound like a dream come true to some, a life where you could command chocolate for breakfast and banish bedtime forever. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a fairy tale. Louis wasn't exactly handed the keys to the kingdom with a good luck kid. Instead, enter Marie de Medici, his Italian-born mother and the newly minted regent, whose grip on power was as firm as a vintage Bordeaux cork. She took the reins, ruling in his stead, while Louis was left to navigate court life, a bizarre blend of power, politics, and priceless wigs. Speaking of wigs, the French court was a peculiar beast. Imagine a place where fashion was as dangerous as it was fabulous. Courtiers strutted around in outfits so grand they made a peacock look like it was having a bad feather day. But beneath the layers of silk and satin, there was a tangled web of ambition and intrigue. Everyone was jostling for a slice of influence, like a game of political musical chairs where the music never stopped. Back to young Louis, who found himself in a bit of a royal pickle. He was technically the king, but with his mother pulling the strings, he was more like a puppet in a play he barely understood. Marie de Medici's regency was marked by her fondness for Italian favorites, much to the chagrin of French nobles who preferred their politics homegrown. Her reliance on Concino Concini, her Italian confidant, turned the court into a daily drama with more plot twists than a Shakespearean tragedy. Concini wasn't just any advisor. He was a master of the political chessboard, and Marie trusted him implicitly, giving him titles and power that made the French nobility's blood boil harder than a pot-au-feu on a winter's day. His influence was so vast that he was eventually made the Marshal of France, though he had never set foot on a battlefield. This was France, after all, where the pen, or rather, the royal decree, was mightier than the sword. While the adults were embroiled in their power struggles, young Louis had his own set of challenges. Imagine trying to concentrate on your lessons when you're surrounded by courtiers whispering about coups and conspiracies. And let's not forget the pressure of having to measure up to his father, Henry Roman IV, the beloved good King Henry, who had a knack for keeping both people and peace in line. Louis Roman XIII had big shoes to fill, figuratively speaking, of course, since he was still growing into his own. Despite the absurdities of court life, young Louis wasn't totally oblivious. He observed, listened, and learned from the shadows of the throne room. He witnessed the rivalries, the alliances, and the betrayals that seemed to be the court's daily bread. Meanwhile, his tutors tried to instill in him the virtues of kingship, though Louis might have been more interested in the falconry lessons than the finer points of statecraft. One can't help but feel a bit for the boy. Here he was, a kid with the title of king, but without the power to decide what he wanted for dinner. The courtiers' whispers must have sounded like a never-ending symphony of who's in, who's out. And while Louis might have been young, he was no fool. He sensed the tension, the undercurrents of plotting, and the precariousness of his own position. As he grew older, Louis began to chafe at the constraints of his mother's regency. He was ready to step into the role he was born to, but Marie was reluctant to let go of the reins. Their relationship was a classic power struggle. Think teenage rebellion, but with a crown and scepter instead of a skateboard and headphones. By 1617, Louis was 16, and things came to a head. The boy king was ready to prove he was more than just a figurehead. In a dramatic twist worthy of a soap opera, Concino Concini was assassinated, a move that was as much about freeing Louis from his mother's shadow as it was about eliminating a divisive figure. With Concini gone, Marie de Medici's grip on power weakened, and Louis finally stepped out of her shadow. This marked the end of his mother's regency and the beginning of Louis's direct rule. It was a bold move, but it showed Louis had the guts to make tough decisions. The boy king was growing up, and the court was about to find out just what kind of monarch he was becoming. So, there you have it. The early years of Louis Roman XIII, a tale of a child king navigating a world of powdered wigs, courtly drama, and the daunting task of stepping out from behind his mother's skirts to wear the crown in his own right. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in his life is going to make these early years look like a walk in the royal gardens. But as Louis Roman XIII stepped into the spotlight, the court was about to get a new star. Enter Cardinal Richelieu, the original power behind the throne, a man whose political maneuvering would make Machiavelli look like an amateur. Richelieu wasn't just the king's advisor. He was the puppet master of a sprawling political theater where nobles jostled for power like sharpers at a Black Friday sale. His rise to power wasn't a matter of luck. It was a masterclass in political chess where Richelieu always seemed to be several moves ahead. Let's talk about Richelieu's strategic genius, the kind of shrewdness that could turn a game of checkers into a high-stakes chess match. Born Armand Jean Duplessis, he was a man who understood the value of patience and precision. When he entered the political scene, France was a mess of internal squabbles and external threats. The Huguenots, France's Protestant minority, were causing headaches, and the 30 Years' War was raging in Europe. Richelieu knew that to stabilize France, he had to centralize power and cut through the aristocratic red tape that was strangling the monarchy. Richelieu's ascent began modestly enough. He was initially appointed as the royal chaplain and later became the Bishop of Lucerne. But the real turning point came in 1624 when he joined the Conseil du Roi, the King's Council. It wasn't long before he became Louis Roman XIII principal minister, and let's just say he hit the ground running. Richelieu had no time for the court's frivolous distractions. His eyes were firmly set on the prize, securing the king's power and, by extension, his own. Now, to appreciate Richelieu's maneuvers, you've got to understand the economic realities of the time. France was like a teenager with a maxed-out credit card. The monarchy was hemorrhaging money faster than a leaky barrel loses wine. Wars were expensive affairs, and the 30 Years' War was no exception. Richelieu had to keep the coffers filled, and that meant clever taxation, and financial reforms that made him about as popular as a tax collector at a party. But Richelieu wasn't just about crunching numbers. He was a master of the dark arts of espionage and intrigue. Nobles who dared to challenge the crown found themselves caught in a web of deceit and manipulation. Richelieu had spies everywhere, and his network of informants was as vast as it was effective. Should you find yourself on the wrong side of Richelieu, you might wake up to find your lands confiscated, or, worse, your head on the chopping block. His ability to outmaneuver his opponents was legendary. Rumor has it he could smell a plot against the king from a mile away, though it's more likely he just had an excellent intelligence network. Speaking of plots, let's dive into one of the most infamous episodes of Richelieu's career, the Day of the Dupes in 1630. Picture this: Richelieu versus Marie de Medici, the Queen Mother, in a showdown that would make any reality TV producer salivate. The tension had been mounting for years as Marie tried to oust Richelieu from power, seeing him as an obstacle to her own ambitions. The drama reached its climax on November 10, 1630, when it seemed Richelieu's days were numbered. Louis Roman XIII, caught between his mother and his minister, seemed ready to side with Marie, but Richelieu wasn't about to go down without a fight. In a move that would make a Hollywood screenwriter proud, Richelieu turned the tables. Through a series of deft political maneuvers, he managed to win back the king's favor. Louis Roman XIII, perhaps realizing that his mother's influence was more trouble than it was worth, chose to keep Richelieu. Marie de Medici was left out in the cold, quite literally, as she was sent into exile. Richelieu's triumph on the Day of the Dupes wasn't just a personal victory. It was a turning point that solidified his grip on power and ensured that no one, not even the king's own mother, could stand in his way. Richelieu's tenure as the king's chief minister was marked by his relentless pursuit of French dominance in Europe. He played the diplomatic game like a maestro directing a symphony, always aware of the economic implications of his actions. Wars were fought not just with swords and muskets, but with ducats and diplomatic treaties. Richelieu's policies often meant squeezing the French people like a lemon to fund his grand ambitions, a fact that didn't win him many friends among the populace. Yet, for all his harshness, his vision of a centralized, powerful France was inching closer to reality. The cardinal was also a man who understood the power of image and narrative. He cultivated an air of mystery and authority, dressing in his signature red robes that signaled his ecclesiastical authority while reminding everyone of his political clout. It was as if he was saying, "I'm not just a man of God, I'm a man of power." This duality was key to his success. He was both feared and respected, a combination that ensured his policies were implemented, even if grudgingly. For Richelieu, maintaining power was a balancing act of Machiavellian proportions. He had to keep the nobles in check, placate the king, and manage France's role in international affairs, all while ensuring the kingdom's economy didn't collapse under the weight of its own ambitions. The costs of maintaining power were astronomical, and Richelieu's financial acumen was constantly put to the test. He introduced measures to reform taxation and streamline government spending, though these often met with resistance from those who preferred the status quo. Amidst all these political machinations, Richelieu never lost sight of his ultimate goal, to make France the dominant power in Europe. His foreign policy was aggressive, aimed at weakening the Habsburgs, France's long-standing rivals. The 30 Years' War was a pivotal conflict, and Richelieu's decision to support Protestant forces against the Catholic Habsburgs was a masterstroke of realpolitik. It wasn't about religion, it was about power. Richelieu understood that sometimes you had to make alliances with unlikely partners to achieve your ends. As we wrap up this chapter on Richelieu, let's take a moment to appreciate the man behind the myth. Yes, he was ruthless and uncompromising, but he was also a visionary who reshaped France at a time when it could easily have crumbled. His legacy is a complex tapestry of power, politics, and ambition, a testament to the lengths one will go to in the pursuit of greatness. So, while Richelieu might not be the kind of guy you'd want to invite to your dinner party, there's no denying he was a master at the Game of Thrones. Stay tuned, because the saga of Louis Roman XIII reign is about to get even more intriguing. We've got more political squabbles, economic challenges, and of course, the ever-present question of who really holds the power in the grand game of monarchy. As we saunter into the world of Louis Roman XIII court, brace yourself for a spectacle of silk, scandal, and more powdered faces than a make-up convention. Louis Roman XIII might have had the political acumen of Cardinal Richelieu at his disposal, but he also had a penchant for the dramatic, the decadent, and occasionally the downright bizarre. Think of his court as a 17th century reality show, where every day was an episode filled with intrigue, opulence, and the occasional duel. First, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the peacock. The French court was notorious for its extravagance, a place where appearances were everything. We're talking about attire so lavish, it could have doubled as a down payment on a shadow. Courtiers draped themselves in lace and velvet, sporting wigs that could rival a small cloud in both size and volume. But don't be fooled by the glitz and glamour. Beneath the layers of finery, the court was a hotbed of gossip, jealousy, and endless jockeying for the king's ever-fickle favour. Now, here's a tidbit to keep you entertained. Louis Roman XIII wasn't just your average monarch with a taste for grandeur. No, this was a king with peculiar hobbies that would make even the most ardent Renaissance man raise an eyebrow. For starters, Louis was an avid falconer, a pastime that might seem regal but was, in reality, a messy affair involving a lot of bird droppings. Imagine trying to negotiate peace treaties while your prized hawk decides your royal shoulder is its new perch and toilet. This king also had a love for music and the theatre, indulging in performances that made the court a lively, albeit expensive, stage for entertainment. Louis himself was known to dabble in acting, though his performances were more about spectacle than substance. Think of him as the world's first royal influencer, paving the way for future aristocrats with a flair for the dramatic. But for all its opulence, life at court was not all champagne and caviar. In fact, many courtiers found themselves living on the edge, financially and socially. The cost of maintaining appearances was astronomical, and those who couldn't keep up with the ever-escalating demands of fashion found themselves on the fringes, both sartorially and politically. Economic disparity was as glaring as the gilded mirrors adorning the palace walls. While the elite feasted on lavish banquets, the common folk often struggled to put bread on the table. Talk about a tale of two cities, or in this case, a tale of one court and countless villages. The court's romanticized image of endless parties and unbridled luxury certainly has its appeal, but reality paints a different picture. The truth is, life at court was a constant balancing act, a precarious dance where one misstep could lead to social exile or worse. The competition for royal patronage was ruthless. Alliances were as fleeting as a summer breeze, and today's confidant could be tomorrow's adversary. In a world where friendships were forged and broken over a sip of wine, trust was a luxury few could afford. Let's not forget the complicated relationships that peppered Louis's court like an over-seasoned stew. Marriage was less about love and more about strategy, a chessboard where families maneuvered their sons and daughters like pawns to secure alliances and fortify power. Louis himself was married to Anne of Austria, a union that was more about political expedience than romantic fervor. Their relationship was a study in contrasts, a partnership marked by long stretches of indifference punctuated by brief moments of affection. Despite the lack of a fairy tale romance, their marriage did produce heirs, which was, after all, the primary job description for royal spouses. Their son, the future Louis Roman XIV, was born in 1638, securing the Bourbon line at a time when political stability was more fragile than a porcelain teacup at a toddler's tea party. While marital politics played out in the public eye, the court's private lives were far more colorful and complicated. Affairs were as common as court banquets, with whispered rumors of trysts and clandestine meetings circulating faster than a courtier could down a goblet of wine. These liaisons, though scandalous, were often tolerated, provided they didn't interfere with the delicate dance of diplomacy and power. And then there were the parties. Oh, the parties. Picture opulent balls with music, dancing, and enough food to feed a small army. These gatherings were more than just social events. They were political arenas where alliances were forged over a game of cards or shattered by a misplaced word. For the courtiers, attending was not just a matter of pleasure, but of survival. You had to be seen, to be part of the conversation, or risk becoming irrelevant, a fate worse than wearing last season's wig. But let's not romanticize it too much. Behind the glittering facade, the court was a pressure cooker of stress and paranoia. The constant need to impress and outshine one's peers was exhausting, and the financial burden of keeping up with the latest fashions and entertaining extravagantly often led courtiers into debt. It was a vicious cycle of spend, impress, repeat, with little room for genuine connection or relaxation. The court was also a cultural hub, a place where ideas flowed as freely as the wine. It was here that the seeds of French classical culture were sown, with artists, musicians, and writers flocking to the court in the hopes of securing patronage. This patronage was essential for survival, as creative pursuits were not exactly lucrative without a wealthy backer. Thanks to this system, the arts flourished, giving rise to iconic figures like playwright Pierre Corneille and composer Jean-Baptiste Lully, who would leave indelible marks on French culture. Yet, for all its grandeur and cultural significance, Louis Roman XIII court was, at its core, a microcosm of the human condition, flawed, complex, and endlessly fascinating. It was a place where ambition and artistry collided, where the pursuit of power was as much a part of daily life as the morning mass. In this world of calculated moves and masked intentions, every gesture was loaded with meaning, every glance a potential gambit in the game of courtly survival. So, while the romantic myths of Louis Roman XIII court may paint a picture of endless luxury and untroubled leisure, the reality was far more nuanced. It was a place of contradictions, where beauty and art coexisted with intrigue and betrayal. As we leave this chapter, keep in mind that the court story is far from over. There's more drama, more intrigue, and more history to unfold. Stay tuned for the next act in this royal saga, where the stakes are high, the players are cunning, and the outcome is anything but certain. As we leave behind the silk and scandal of Louis Roman XIII court, let's pivot to the media, grittier world of military and foreign policies, a realm where powdered wigs are swapped for helmets, and gossip gives way to gunpowder. Enter the 30 Years' War, the European conflict that started as a religious squabble, but snowballed into a continent-wide melee. Picture it like a messy family reunion where everyone forgot why they started fighting in the first place. Now, Louis Roman XIII was no stranger to the complexities of power, thanks to his years of courtly soap operas. Yet the battlefield was a different beast altogether. With Cardinal Richelieu at his side, Louis aimed to make France the heavyweight champion of Europe. But let's be real, Louis was more about the title than the fight itself. Richelieu, on the other hand, was the strategist, the grand architect of France's foreign policy, a man who could see 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still deciding whether to roll the dice. The 30 Years' War, 1618-1648, was a marathon, not a sprint. By the time France entered the fray in 1635, the conflict had already been going for 17 years. France's involvement was less about defending Catholicism and more about curbing the power of the Habsburgs, those pesky neighbors with an annoying habit of surrounding France like an overzealous hug. It wasn't just about faith, it was about politics, power, and let's face it, a good old-fashioned land grab. France's entry into the war was bold, but not exactly smooth. The initial campaigns were as chaotic as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. The French army, under the not-so-experienced leadership of Louis de Bourbon, the Count of Soissons, stumbled into the Battle of Les Avens in 1635 and promptly fell flat on its face, suffering a crushing defeat. A classic case of too eager, too soon, one might say. Not exactly the start Richelieu had in mind for his grand European adventure. Despite early setbacks, Richelieu had a knack for turning lemons into lemonade, or more accurately, turning defeats into stepping stones for greater schemes. He restructured the military, bringing in seasoned commanders like Bernard of Saxe-Weimar and Henry de la Tour d'Auvergne, Viscount of Turenne. These guys were the real deal, not just nobles with a fancy title and a sword. Under their command, the French army gradually transformed from a ragtag bunch into a force to be reckoned with. The French military machine started picking up steam. In 1643, at the Battle of Rocroi, the French forces delivered a decisive victory against the Spanish, marking the beginning of the end for Spain's dominance in Europe. It was a game-changer, a moment where the tides turned, showing that the Habsburgs were not invincible after all. The battle became legendary, not just for its strategic brilliance, but for signaling the rise of France as a major player on the European stage. But let's not sugarcoat things. War is expensive. Like, you might want to check your bank statement while sitting down. Expensive. The French crown was bleeding money faster than a leaky faucet. The financial toll of the 30 Years' War was staggering. By the 1640, France's national debt had ballooned to a whopping 100 million livres, a sum that could have funded several lifetimes of extravagant court banquets. Taxes soared, and the burden fell squarely on the shoulders of the common folk, who were less thrilled about funding royal ambitions than, say, feeding their families. The economic strain was palpable, with inflation creeping higher than a noble's powdered wig. Bread prices skyrocketed, leading to unrest among the peasantry, who were already struggling under the weight of heavy taxation and conscription. Eat cake, you say? Not a chance. The French populace was more likely to find themselves in bread lines than at any royal feast. The rural economy sagged under the pressure, as fields lay fallow and villages emptied with men off fighting in faraway lands. Social unrest simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. The Fronde, a series of civil wars between 1648 and 1653, was partly fueled by the economic grievances exacerbated by the war's demands. It was a chaotic time, a reminder that while courts and kings plotted grand strategies, the real cost was paid by those at the bottom of the social ladder. The Fronde highlighted the volatility of a nation stretched too thin, where the gap between rich and poor was as wide as the Seine. Despite the turmoil, Richelieu's vision for France was becoming a reality. The centralization of power, the weakening of noble influence, and the strengthening of the monarchy were all byproducts of his policies. France was emerging from the shadows of the Habsburgs, its influence spreading across Europe like a fine wine at a court banquet. But it was a costly ascent, one that left the French economy battered and bruised, struggling to recover from decades of warfare. As we delve deeper into the political machinations of Louis Roman XIII reign, it becomes clear that the king's ambitions were often overshadowed by those of his cardinal. Richelieu's grand plans sometimes clashed with Louis's more immediate concerns, a classic case of the idealist versus the realist. The king's struggle was real, balancing his desire for glory with the pragmatic necessities of governance, a juggling act that required more finesse than a court jester on stage. In the grand tapestry of history, Louis Roman XIII reign was a pivotal period, a time when France began its transformation into the cultural and political powerhouse it would become. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The road to greatness was paved with conflict, compromise, and a fair share of blunders. Louis might have been the king, but it was Richelieu who orchestrated the symphony of power, ensuring that France's star would rise, no matter the cost. So stay tuned, because the story isn't over yet. There's more intrigue, more conflict, and more of that delightful chaos that makes history so irresistibly human. As we navigate the complexities of Louis Roman XIII reign, remember that behind every grand gesture and bold move lies a world of hidden motives and untold stories. The stage is set for the next act, where the stakes are higher, the players more cunning, and the outcome as unpredictable as ever. As we transition from the battlefield back to the royal court, let's set our sights on the twilight years of Louis Roman XIII, a period as complex as a Parisian pastry. By now, France was a patchwork quilt of triumphs and tribulations, and Louis was the man sitting in the middle, trying to keep the threads from unraveling. He may have been king, but the looming shadow of Cardinal Richelieu was as omnipresent as the aroma of freshly baked baguettes in a Parisian street. The later years of Louis's reign were marked by his struggle to assert his authority amidst the political chessboard orchestrated by Richelieu. Despite the cardinal's death in 1642, his influence lingered like a particularly stubborn ghost. Louis, never the most robust of health, was left to steer the ship of state through increasingly turbulent waters, clutching the wheel with hands more accustomed to the falconer's glove than the reins of power. Now, don't get me wrong, Louis Roman XIII wasn't some puppet king, merely nodding along while Richelieu pulled the strings. He was more like the monarch who'd grown tired of the theatre, preferring the comfort of his hunting lodge to the drama of the court. His later years saw him plagued with illness, a series of ailments that would put a medieval physician's skill to the test. By 1643, Louis was battling tuberculosis, a disease as merciless as the political intrigues that surrounded him. Before we wrap a cloak around Louis's legacy, let's take a closer look at the economic realities of his reign, a subject as thrilling as a tax return, but just as crucial. France, under Louis's watch, was like a teenager with a penchant for luxury, but a wallet full of mothballs. The 30 Years' War had left the kingdom's coffers emptier than a wine bottle after a court banquet. Yet, there's no denying that Louis, with Richelieu's machinations, had set the stage for France's rise as a European powerhouse. The centralization of power was one of Louis's lasting impacts, even if it was largely Richelieu's doing. The nobility, once powerful enough to rival the crown, found their influence waning as Louis and his cardinal reshaped the government. Think of it as a political game of Jenga, where removing noble power was risky, but ultimately necessary to keep the Tower of State from toppling over. As Louis's health declined, so did his ability to manage the affairs of state, and by the time of his death in May 1643, at the age of 41, the kingdom was a mixture of burgeoning strength and festering discontent. Louis's passing marked the end of an era, yet it paved the way for his son, the future Louis Roman XIV, to step into the spotlight, a prospect that had both the court and the country holding their breath. Young Louis, just 5 years old, was destined to become the Sun King, a ruler whose reign would eclipse his father's in both glory and controversy. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Louis Roman XIII legacy is more than just a footnote in the story of his more famous offspring. His reign was a bridge, a period of transition where France began to shed its medieval skin and step into the modern age. Yet, for all his accomplishments, Louis Roman XIII is often overshadowed by the myth of the powerful king, one that doesn't quite match the historical reality of a monarch often outshone by his advisors. So, what do we make of Louis Roman XIII? Was he a great king, or merely a placeholder in the annals of history? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. He was a man who understood the weight of his crown, but was content to let others bear it for him. A king who preferred the quiet of the hunt to the noise of the throne room. His reign was marked by moments of brilliance and bouts of indecision, a testament to the complexity of human leadership in an age of change. History remembers Louis Roman XIII as a monarch who laid the groundwork for France's golden age, yet his legacy is tinged with the shadows of those who stood beside him, guiding his hand and shaping his policies. It's a reminder that even kings are not always masters of their own fate, often caught in the tides of history they struggle to control. And there you have it, the tale of Louis Roman XIII, an era of ambition, intrigue, and the relentless pursuit of power. His story is a tapestry of contradictions, a portrait of a king who was both sovereign and spectator. As we close this chapter, let's remember that history is not just about the grand gestures and the epic battles, but also the quiet moments, the personal struggles, and the enduring legacies that shape our world. So, here's to Louis Roman XIII, a king who might not have been the brightest star in the sky, but whose reign set the stage for the brilliance that was to come. In the grand tapestry of ancient history, where the Nile unfurled like a ribbon through the desert sands, there existed a woman whose allure transcended millennia. And no, I'm not talking about Cleopatra. We're diving further back to the 14th century BC, into the world of Queen Nefertiti. Imagine a civilization humming with the construction of pyramids and temples, where politics was as complicated as a modern-day soap opera, featuring a cast of pharaohs and guards that could make even the most intrepid Game of Thrones fan dizzy. Nefertiti, whose name literally means the beautiful one has come, was more than just a pretty face. But let's face it, if you mention Nefertiti today, most people's minds jump straight to that famous bust, crafted around 1345 BC by the hands of the talented Thutmose. This bust has sparked more debates than a Twitter feed on a slow news day. Was it a beauty contest entry? Spoiler alert, not quite. It wasn't sculpted as a mere ode to her looks, but rather as a symbol of power and divine beauty that was strategically used to elevate her status alongside her husband, Pharaoh Akhenaten. Speaking of Akhenaten, this guy was quite the radical. He decided to play a game of religious musical chairs by tossing out the entire pantheon of Egyptian gods in favor of a one-guard show starring Aten, the sun disk. Bold move, right? It was like replacing an entire streaming services catalog with a single blockbuster movie. The 18th dynasty was known for many things, but this religious reform was a seismic shift that reverberated through the sands of time. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Life in 14th century BC Egypt wasn't all glamour and gold. The economy was as complex as a pyramid blueprint, with grain as currency and trading routes spanning thousands of miles. It was a society built on the backs of farmers and laborers, with a political system as intricate as a scarab amulet. Despite the romantic notion of pharaohs swathed in gold, the reality was a bit more sweat and stone, with a dash of divine right thrown in for good measure. But back to our queen. Nefertiti was not just a silent partner standing in the shadow of her husband. She was a co-regent, wielding power and influence in her own right. Imagine her as a political powerhouse, possibly even donning the pharaoh's crown herself. A theory some historians argue, although the evidence is as elusive as a mirage on the Sahara. Her partnership with Akhenaten was portrayed in tomb reliefs and inscriptions as one of mutual respect and shared power, a rarity in the annals of history. And yet, for all her achievements, Nefertiti's story is shrouded in mystery. Her disappearance from historical records around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign is a puzzle that has left archaeologists scratching their heads for decades. Some speculate she took on a new identity. Others believe she met an untimely end. Whatever the case, her legacy endures, not just in the limestone bust that resides in Berlin, but in the very fabric of Egyptian history. It's easy to romanticize the ancient world with its pharaohs and hieroglyphs, but let's not forget the reality beneath the hieratic script. The grandeur of Nefertiti's time was built on the labor of countless workers and the complex machinations of court politics. Her rise to power and her role in one of history's boldest religious experiments underscores her significance beyond mere beauty. She was a queen who dared to redefine the divine landscape of Egypt, and in doing so, etched her name into history far deeper than any bust could. So, as you drift into dreams of ancient lands, remember Nefertiti not just as an icon of beauty, but as a formidable figure who navigated the sands of power with grace, strategy, and perhaps a touch of audacity. The next time you gaze upon her bust, think not of a beauty contest, but of a legacy chiseled into the very stone of time. The saga of Nefertiti continues, but let's step away from the timeless allure of her bust and peer into the real power moves she made when she wasn't busy being the Mona Lisa of ancient Egypt. You see, Nefertiti wasn't just sitting pretty on a throne. She had a hand in the wheeling and dealing of her day, playing the political chess game with the finesse of a grandmaster. And if you think ancient politics were just dusty scrolls and pharaoh posturing, think again. This was the Bronze Age's version of high-stakes diplomacy, complete with its own set of emojis, the Amarna letters. Now, if you're imagining these letters as delicate papyrus pages filled with poetic odes and declarations of eternal friendship, think again. These bad boys were more like an ancient chain of awkward diplomatic texts, complete with misunderstandings and the occasional passive-aggressive jab. Picture this. You're a ruler in the ancient Near East, and you've just received a note from Pharaoh Akhenaten, possibly penned or influenced by Nefertiti herself. You're reading through the lines, trying to discern if the pharaoh is actually complimenting your kingdom's prosperity, or subtly hinting that your last gold shipment was a little light. The Amarna letters, discovered in 1887 at the site of Akhenaten, modern-day Amarna, are a treasure trove of these diplomatic exchanges. Written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the time, imagine a United Nations meeting where everyone speaks Esperanto. These tablets reveal a world where kings were more like CEOs of ancient corporations, negotiating trade rights, marriages, and military alliances. And Nefertiti, as co-regent, would have been right in the thick of it, possibly advising Akhenaten or even crafting responses herself. Nefertiti's influence wasn't just limited to smooth-talking foreign rulers. She also played a pivotal role in Egypt's internal affairs, particularly in the realm of trade and the economy. The shift from the traditional pantheon to the worship of Aten wasn't just a religious upheaval. It was an economic one too. Temples dedicated to the old gods were major economic centers, with their own lands, workforce, and production capabilities. By centralizing worship around Aten, Akhenaten, and by extension, Nefertiti, was effectively centralizing economic power. This religious reform meant that the wealth of the temples was redirected, and guess who was likely keeping an eye on that treasure trove? Yep, our queen. The move would have impacted everything from the grain harvests that fed the nation to the artisans who crafted the dazzling jewelry that still captivates museum-goers today. Nefertiti was at the helm of a ship navigating through turbulent economic waters, ensuring that Egypt's wealth was not only preserved, but enhanced under this new religious order. And then there's XIII, the city built from scratch in the barren desert, a testament to the sheer will and ambition of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Talk about urban planning on steroids. This was no small feat. The city was constructed in a record time of about 4 years, a blink in the timeline of ancient construction projects. It sprawled over 5 miles, about 8 kilometers, along the Nile's east bank, complete with temples, palaces, and residential areas for the elite and workers alike. It's estimated that tens of thousands of laborers were involved in its construction, a massive undertaking that would have required meticulous planning and a solid economic strategy. Building XIII wasn't just about erecting grand structures. It was a statement of power and a hub for the new monotheistic cult. The resources needed were vast, from the limestone quarried miles away to the logistics of feeding and housing the workforce. And let's not forget the cost. While ancient Egypt didn't have a currency system like ours, the equivalent in labor and goods would have been astronomical. This was a city built on the promise of a new dawn, yet it demanded the sweat and toil of countless individuals, a reality that often gets lost in the romantic haze of history. Nefertiti's role in this grand project cannot be overstated. As co-regent, she would have been integral in overseeing not just the construction, but the economic shifts that accompanied it. Her ability to navigate these changes speaks volumes about her political acumen and understanding of governance. The city wasn't just a monument to the Aten. It was a physical manifestation of Nefertiti and Akhenaten's vision for Egypt. A bold experiment that, like all experiments, came with its risks and rewards. But amidst all this grandeur and power play, one must wonder, what was it like to be Nefertiti in the eye of this ancient storm? To be a woman with such influence, steering the course of history alongside her husband in a world that was, let's face it, not exactly known for its feminist principles. Yet, here she was, a queen who didn't just survive the patriarchal labyrinth, but thrived in it, leaving an indelible mark on history. While we celebrate Nefertiti's legacy, it's crucial to peel back the layers of myth and recognize the human realities beneath them. The allure of her story lies in the seamless blend of legend and fact, a queen who was not just a symbol of beauty, but a force of nature in her own right. As we continue to explore her life and times, let's keep in mind that her story is far from over. In fact, it's just getting started. So, stay tuned as we unravel more of this historical tapestry, where power, politics, and personality collide in the sands of ancient Egypt. Now, let's dive into the heart of Nefertiti's royal household, where family dynamics were as tangled as a cat's cradle. Picture a palace teeming with the hustle and bustle of court life, but add a dash of drama that would make a reality TV producer salivate. Nefertiti and Akhenaten had 6 daughters, each one a potential pawn or player in the intricate game of dynastic chess. Forget the fairy tale image of a harmonious royal family. This was more like an episode of Keeping Up with the Pharaohs. First, let's set the stage with a little historical context. In a patriarchal society like ancient Egypt, the birth of daughters was met with mixed feelings. Yes, they could secure alliances through marriage, but they didn't carry the pharaonic bloodline in the same way a son would. Yet, in this unique household, where Nefertiti wielded significant power, her daughters had roles that were far from ornamental. They appeared in numerous art depictions alongside their parents, a clear sign they were more than just background decoration. Take Meretate, the eldest. Her name means beloved of Aten, and she was indeed beloved and busy. She was married to her younger half-brother, Smenkhare, more on him later, in a classic case of royal family tree gymnastics to keep power consolidated. The idea was that by marrying within the family, they could keep the divine blood pure. It's a tradition that has all the hallmarks of a Shakespearean tragedy waiting to happen, but hey, it worked for them. Sort of. Meretate might have been thrust into the political spotlight, but she wasn't alone. Her sisters Makate, Anchisempartan, Neferneferuet and Tasheret, Neferneferia, and Seripena played their parts in this dynastic drama too. Makate, the second daughter, is believed to have died at a young age, possibly due to childbirth complications, a harsh reminder of the dangerous realities women faced, even in the highest echelons of power. Enkisenparten, another key player, later became Enkisenamun and married the boy king Tutankhamun, her half-brother. Yes, that Tutankhamun, the one with the golden mask and the curse that launched 1,000 mummy movies. Talk about family connections. In the cutthroat world of Egyptian politics, these daughters were not just daughters. They were strategic pieces in a game that determined the fate of an empire. But here's where things get really interesting. Around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti vanishes from the historical record. Poof, gone like the last piece of pizza at a college party. Did she die? Was she ousted in a palace coup? Or did she pull a Houdini and reappear as Pharaoh Smenkhare? Let's break it down. First, the death theory. It's plausible, given the harsh realities of ancient life, but there's no definitive tomb or burial site that confirms this. Some speculate that she could have succumbed to a sudden illness or even foul play. Royal courts aren't exactly bastions of safety. Then there's the theory that she was demoted or sidelined. Maybe Akhenaten's radical religious reforms hit a snag, and she was the scapegoat. Internal politics could have shifted, and she found herself on the losing side of a power struggle. Again, it's all speculation, because those ancient Egyptians weren't exactly live tweeting their every move. And now, for the pièce de résistance, the Smenkhare hypothesis. Some scholars suggest that Nefertiti may have taken on a new identity as Smenkhare, a co-regent, or even a successor to Akhenaten. This idea isn't just a product of modern imagination. It's rooted in the tantalizing gaps and overlaps in the historical record. Smenkhare appears in the annals for a brief period, its identity as mysterious as a shadow in the desert. Could Nefertiti have pulled off the ultimate political rebranding? This theory gains traction when you consider the fluidity of gender roles and divine status in ancient Egypt. The line between male and female could blur at the highest levels of power, especially when the stakes involve divine legitimacy. If anyone could have navigated such treacherous waters, it was Nefertiti, the queen who had already defied so many norms. But regardless of whether she became Smenkhare or simply faded into the background, her legacy endured through her daughters and their marriages. These alliances were not mere footnotes. They were crucial in maintaining the Atenist line, and by extension, the religious and political revolution that defined her tenure. So, what does this tell us about Nefertiti and her era? It was a time of monumental change, where the sands of power shifted like the desert winds. Her story is a testament to the complexities of ancient politics, where personal ambition and family loyalty intertwined like the hieroglyphs that chronicled their deeds. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of Nefertiti, remember that history is not just about what happened, it's about why it mattered. This queen was more than a beautiful face. She was a force of nature in a world where the divine and the earthly collided in a grand spectacle. Her influence shaped not just a dynasty, but the very fabric of Egyptian society. And so, our journey through the life and times of Nefertiti continues, with more revelations to come. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the annals of ancient intrigue, where every discovery adds a new layer to the story of a queen who defied the sands of time. So, let's pick up where we left off, right in the thick of ancient Egyptian intrigue and upheaval. The grand Atenist experiment, with its sun-drenched worship and audacious architectural feats, was about to hit the skids faster than a chariot with a broken wheel. Akhenaten's radical religious reforms, championed by Nefertiti, might have been revolutionary, but they didn't exactly win a popularity contest. With Akhenaten's reign coming to a close, things were about to change, and not in a new and improved sort of way. Think more along the lines of an ancient Egyptian version of Oops, let's pretend that never happened. After Akhenaten's death, enter stage right. King Tutankhamun, the boy king whose name has launched 1,000 documentaries. He might have been just a kid, 9 years old when he ascended the throne, but his reign marked a monumental pivot back to the old ways. Bye-bye Aten, hello Amun. The return to polytheism was as swift as a Nile crocodile on the hunt, and it wasn't just a religious about-face. It was a savvy political maneuver to stabilize a shaky empire. With the restoration of the traditional gods, the temples of Amun and the rest of the pantheon reopened faster than a pop-up shop after a rave review. Temples were more than places of worship. They were economic powerhouses, managing lands, production, and a workforce that rivaled modern corporations. By swinging the pendulum back to the old religion, Tutankhamun and those whispering in his ear were essentially rebooting the economy. This move was like hitting Control plus Z on the XIII chapter, undoing the centralization of power that XIII and Nefertiti had painstakingly crafted. But the most telling sign of this reversal, Akhenaten, the city that once stood as a beacon of monotheism, was abandoned faster than a bad fashion trend. The city's sprawling temples and palaces, once bustling with activity, became eerily silent as the sands reclaimed them. It's a poignant reminder of how quickly human achievements can be erased when they fall out of favor. And what of Nefertiti's legacy? Well, it was nearly wiped from history's chalkboard. The successors to Egypt's throne preferred to treat the XVIII period like an embarrassing teenage phase, best not mentioned at family gatherings. Monuments were defaced, inscriptions chiseled away, and Nefertiti's name was erased from many records. This was a deliberate attempt to obliterate her influence, a kind of ancient cancel culture that sought to bury the past without a trace. Fast forward a few millennia, and the story of Nefertiti could have remained in the shadows, if not for a serendipitous twist of fate. Enter the year 1912, when a German archaeological team led by Ludwig Borchardt stumbled upon the find of a lifetime at Ammon. Among the dust and rubble, they unearthed the now iconic limestone bust of Nefertiti. And just like that, Nefertiti was back in the spotlight, her likeness captivating the world with its timeless beauty. The bust itself is a masterpiece of ancient artistry, but it's also sparked enough debates to rival a modern-day Twitter storm. Is it an idealized portrait, a piece of propaganda, or simply an artist's rendition of divine beauty? Whatever the case, it's a testament to the allure of Nefertiti that even her image could inspire such fascination. And this is where things get a bit cloak and dagger. The bust made its way to Berlin, where it remains to this day, despite Egypt's repeated requests for its return. The journey of Nefertiti's bust from the sands of Ammon to the museums of Europe is a story in itself, one that speaks to the complexities of cultural heritage and the tangled web of archaeology, politics, and national pride. The rediscovery of Nefertiti's bust reignited modern interest in her story, casting a spotlight on the queen who was more than a pretty face. She was a woman whose influence stretched beyond her years, whose actions reverberated through time, and whose legacy, though nearly erased, was ultimately resurrected by the very sands that sought to hide it. This modern fascination with Nefertiti is a curious thing. It's as if we're drawn not just to her beauty, but to the enigma of her life. In a world where history often overlooks the contributions of women, Nefertiti stands out as a testament to female power and resilience. Her story, with its twists, turns, and tantalizing mysteries, continues to capture our imagination, reminding us that history is not just a record of the past, but a canvas on which we paint our present understanding. As we delve deeper into the annals of Nefertiti's time, we uncover layers of history that reveal both the grandeur and the grit of ancient Egypt. Her legacy is a reminder that the stories we tell, and those we forget, shape our understanding of the past. And in the case of Nefertiti, the queen who dared to redefine the divine, her story is far from over. So stay tuned, because the sands of time still hold secrets waiting to be uncovered. Nefertiti's story is a kaleidoscope of power, beauty, and mystery that continues to captivate us. Her life was a tapestry woven with the threads of ancient ambition and modern intrigue. From her rise to power alongside Akhenaten to her mysterious disappearance, Nefertiti embodies the perfect blend of legend and reality that keeps historians and fans alike on the edge of their seats. But what is it about her that makes her more than just an ancient footnote? First, let's talk about her enduring image. The bust of Nefertiti isn't just an artifact. It's a cultural media that crashed into the modern world, sparking debates as fiery as the sun god Aten himself. It's as if the sculptor Thutmose reached across the ages to hand us a snapshot of beauty that defies time. But here's the kicker. Her beauty wasn't just skin deep. In a world where the pharaoh was considered the living embodiment of a god, Nefertiti's image was a political tool. It was crafted to project power, divine favor, and the stability of the Atenist regime. Imagine using your Instagram profile photo to solidify your political alliances. Welcome to Nefertiti's world. This brings us to the question of her legacy. How does a queen who vanished from the historical stage maintain such a grip on our collective imagination? The truth is, she didn't just vanish, she was strategically erased. Her story was buried under the sands of time, much like her city of Akhenaten. But here's the twist. The more the ancients try to erase her, the more we want to know her. It's like the Streisand effect, ancient edition. The attempt to wipe her from history only fueled our desire to resurrect her story and understand her true impact. The rediscovery of her bust in 1912 threw her back into the spotlight, and since then, she's been a superstar of ancient history. Museums, documentaries, novels, you name it, Nefertiti's got it. But why does she resonate so deeply? Perhaps it's because her story is a mirror reflecting our own struggles with identity, power, and legacy. She was a woman who defied the norms of her time, wielding influence in a male-dominated world. In an age where women were often relegated to the background, Nefertiti stood front and center, a reminder that history is not just written by men. But let's not romanticize too much. Nefertiti's era was no utopia. The economic and social upheavals triggered by the Eightist reforms were as real as the pyramids. The transition back to polytheism under Tutankhamun wasn't just a religious shift. It was a desperate attempt to stabilize an economy that had been turned on its head. Temples were reopened not just for spiritual reasons, but because they were the economic lifeblood of the nation. It's a reminder that in history, as in life, money talks. And what about the political landscape she navigated? The court intrigues of ancient Egypt, juicier than a soap opera, with stakes higher than the pyramids. Nefertiti's disappearance from historical records is a testament to the volatile nature of power. Whether she was sidelined, disguised as Smenkhkare, or simply retired from the political scene, her vanishing act underscores the precariousness of her position. It's a harsh reality that power is often fleeting, a lesson as relevant today as it was then. Yet, for all the political machinations and economic realities, Nefertiti's legacy is more than the sum of her bust and her mysteries. It's a testament to the enduring power of narrative. Her story has been shaped by both ancient agendas and modern fascination, each era adding its own layer to her legend. The ancients sought to erase her, modern historians aim to uncover her, and through it all, she remains an icon. So, if Nefertiti could peek through the veil of time and see her modern fame, would she chuckle at the irony or bask in the glory? Would she roll her eyes at the fuss over a limestone bust or revel in the fact that she has indeed outshone the sands of time? Perhaps she'd do both, embodying the complexity that makes her story so compelling. After all, Nefertiti was a woman who played the game of power with finesse and left a legacy that even the passage of millennia can't dim. In the end, Nefertiti's story reminds us that history is not just about dates and events. It's about the people who navigated them. Her life was a dance between the divine and the earthly, where beauty was both a weapon and a shield, and where power was as elusive as the desert breeze. Her legacy is a tapestry of myth and reality, a reminder that the past is not a distant land, but a place where human nature remains ever present. So next time you gaze upon her bust or hear her name, remember the queen who was so much more than a pretty face. Nefertiti was a force of nature who dared to challenge the status quo, a woman whose story continues to inspire and intrigue us. In a world that often forgets the contributions of women, her legacy stands as a testament to their enduring power. And as we close the book on her story, for now, at least, we're left with a tantalizing thought. If Nefertiti could conquer time, what else might she have achieved? The sands of history may shift, but the allure of Nefertiti endures, inviting us to explore the mysteries of the past with fresh eyes and an open mind.